Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was one of the Jedi. At the start of their trip, Naruto and Jiraiya find themselves pulled into the future by an unknown force. With no way back home, and no idea what's going on, what will they do? Join the Jedi, naturally. But there are other, more sinister forces after them as well. With the Force to wield and a new group of friends, can Naruto change the future of a galaxy threatened by darkness? Welcome aboard! Chapter 32. Jedi Master Faye did not often find herself surprised any longer. At her age, which was considerably more advanced than her youthful appearance would suggest, there simply weren't many things which could take her off guard. She was not so arrogant as to think she had experienced everything the galaxy had to offer, but she had certainly seen more than even most Jedi ever managed. However, when she felt the Force urging her to plot a course towards Rago, she was, indeed, shocked. Not at the urge itself, though. Master Faye had spent the better part of 7 centuries listening to such nudges, following the will of the Force. Ever since she had become a Jedi Master, she had embraced the life of a wandering nomad, letting the Force guide her wherever she most needed to be. She did not even report to the Jedi High Council, and had not set foot in the temple in over 300 years. She maintained occasional contact with Yoda, enough to keep abreast of major events in the Order, but that was all. The Force had called her across the length and breadth of the galaxy countless times over the centuries. A pull towards a planet just over a sector away was no great thing. No, what shocked her about this particular call was the strength behind it. Normally the Force's guidance was subtle, a gentle tug pulling her ever so softly in one direction. In the past few decades, those tugs had become ever more subtle and difficult to detect as the dark side clouded the future. This one, however, was nothing like that at all. It slammed into her with all the ephemeral subtlety of a hammer between the eyes. She was already halfway through plotting the course before she even realized she had moved. The last time she had felt anything like this from the Force had been over 3 years ago, when a shock wave had shaken the whole of the Force, throwing the future into turmoil and granting her visions so confused and vibrant she was still trying to make sense of them. This wasn't anything like as strong as that, but it still left her panting and blinking in shock. A moment after the powerful urge to get to Rago with all haste came to her, she felt a surge of darkness and rage pulse through the Force. Somewhere, and if she had to bet, she would put every credit on Rago, someone or something had just channeled the dark side in a major way. It didn't feel like any Force user she had ever felt before. She had faced down dark Jedi and banished ancient Sith spirits, and this was unlike either of those. It was wild, uncontrolled, and animalistic, full of pain and bitterness. Moreover, it felt strangely knotted up in itself, different from how the Force normally flowed. Whatever it was, the Force kept on practically screaming at her to get to Rago and the source of that awful pain and rage. Clearly, someone badly needed her help, and Master Faye had never in her life ignored such a call. She finished plotting her course, using the Force to find the fastest route, and sent her ship hurtling into hyperspace. Fortunately, her yacht was fast. It had been a gift, some 350 years ago, from the government of Devarin, after she had helped cure an outbreak of the Blue Shadow virus that had been ravaging their capital city. As a Jedi, she normally would have declined any reward and shunned material possessions, but as a nomad, the utility of having her own ship had outweighed any philosophical objections she may have had. It was a custom job, designed specifically for her needs of speed and long travel times, and she'd had it retrofitted with more modern systems repeatedly over the centuries. As such, it took her less than an hour to reach her destination. The raging storm of the dark side had subsided some minutes ago, but she still reached out with her senses and searched for any danger before she started the landing sequence. Master Faye had lived for over 700 years, and the reason she had lived that long was because she had not died, and she had not died by virtue of not rushing into potentially dangerous situations like an overexcited strill cub. She had no issue wading into perilous waters, but doing so blindly was the province of the young. The Force didn't warn her of any danger, however. Instead, it sang of grief, pain, and desperation. Somewhere on the planet below, people needed her help. She followed that sensation like a guideline, descending through the atmosphere towards the forests below. The feeling came from near the mouth of what looked like a large ravine, a few kilometers from a recently wrecked ship. It was only as she got closer that she saw it for what it truly was. Stars and moons, she breathed, shocked for the second time in as many hours. What happened here? What she had, at first, taken for a natural ravine, turned out to be nothing of the sort. Instead, it seemed to be the result of some immense weapon. It stretched for more than a kilometer, a deep groove cut as if by a huge blaster bolt. Patches of rock still glowed red-hot, and the trees on either side of the trench smoldered and smoked. Master Fei had seen the result of a heavy turbolaser bombardment before, and she thought this might be what it looked like if one of those terrible weapons were fired parallel to the ground, rather than from space. But if that's true, where is the turbolaser cannon, she thought. This happened less than an hour ago. It would be impossible to hide such a cumbersome weapon in that time. I'm missing something, but what? To compound her bafflement, she also recognized the nearby crashed ship. It may have been centuries, but she could still remember boarding that same cruiser for her own gathering, as well as the gatherings she had guided as a Padawan and, later, a knight. Seeing the crucible wrecked and burning, having obviously been shot down, had her redoubling her haste to land. Aside from Professor Huyan, the crucible primarily carried children. If there was one thing Master Fei would not tolerate, it was a threat to children. It was a subject upon which she held views, and was one of the few things that could break her typical calm. So, if her landing was, perhaps, rougher than normal, it was only because she was in a rush to find and help the survivors of the crash. There were survivors, she was sure. She could sense several young Force sensitives, all of them in pain. Once the ship had finished shaking, she snatched up her medkit and lowered the ramp. Before it was even fully extended, she had jumped to the ground and marched off towards where she sensed the survivors. When she walked past the mouth of the trench, Faye briefly thought she had somehow stepped into a war zone. There were bodies, or what had once been bodies, strewn everywhere. Blood and entrails splattered the ground, and severed limbs dotted the landscape like macabre ornaments. The smell was indescribable, a mixture of burned flesh, colorized blood, and other, worse odors. Only long years of experience in places like this allowed Faye to keep her gorge from rising. Here and there she spotted pieces of armor, including several distinct Mandalorian helmets, some inexplicably crushed, others with their owners' heads still inside them. It was a gruesome sight, and it raised a dozen more questions. Force, what happened here? She had no time to dwell on such mysteries, though, as she quickly spotted a survivor on the other side of the corpse-littered field. It was, she saw as she got closer, a young, orange-skinned Togruta girl. She was wearing a traditional Togruta outfit, now torn and stained from battle, and was holding a copper-hilted lightsaber in one hand. Not hers, if Faye had to guess, judging by how she held it. The poor girl looked exhausted and beaten half to death, but she still stood, wary and defiant, as Faye approached. "Who are you?" she yelled. "What are you doing here?" "My name is Jedi Master Fei, child. I'm here to help." "You're a Jedi?" Hope and suspicion fought a war in the young girl's eyes as she tried to decide whether or not to trust the stranger in front of her. Faye smiled and reached out with the Force to brush against the girl's mind, soothing her tangled emotions and letting her feel the truth of her words. "Yes, young one, I'm a Jedi." "What is your name?" The girl hesitated for a moment before hope won out. "Ahsoka. I'm Ahsoka Tano. It's good to meet you." "Now, do you need help, Ahsoka?" At the word help, Ahsoka's knees almost buckled. She nodded desperately and pointed at a large log behind her. "Please. My friends, they're really hurt. Can you help them?" "You have to help them." Faye nodded and made sure to project calm and reassurance. She could tell the girl was on the verge of shutting down, and she needed her to stay coherent for at least a few minutes more. "Show me. I'm a healer, and I'll do what I can." She followed Ahsoka around the log, where she found 5 others lying in a row on the ground. 2 of them, a human girl and an Nautolan boy, were at least semi-conscious. They sat propped up against the log, but they seemed only minimally aware of their surroundings. A Myriolan girl with a badly broken leg lay next to them, and a boy of some vaguely reptilian species she didn't recognize with a bloody bandage on his side lay next to her. Both of them were unconscious, and the Myriolan, at least, was worryingly pale. More concerning than any of those, however, was the human boy at the end. When she first saw him, Faye wasn't even sure he was alive. How could he be? Most of his skin was missing, either burned or flayed away, she couldn't tell. It was only when she saw the muscles in his neck twitch as he swallowed reflexively that she realized he was, against all odds, still breathing. "Stars, what happened to him?" she asked as she rushed over to treat him. I don't really know," Ahsoka said behind her. "It's hard to explain. He was worse earlier, though. I thought he was going to die, but it's already started growing back. That's why I moved him over here." "What?" Sure enough, when she looked closer, Faye saw that some sections of the boy's body were better off than others, as if they'd already been healing for days. There were even a few sections of new skin on his chest and face. It was like nothing Faye had ever seen before. Not even the most advanced Jedi healing techniques could work so fast on wounds such as these. "How is that even? Naruto's always healed fast," Ahsoka said. Faye pushed her curiosity to the back of her mind. She would ponder this boy, Naruto's, strange healing abilities later. For now, she was just grateful that they seemed to be keeping him alive. In short order, she deemed the Nautolan and the human girl to be in no immediate danger. A quick change of bandages and a few Bacta patches, along with some of her more rapid force healing techniques, stabilized the Myriolan girl and the other boy. Geldos, Ahsoka called him. They were not out of danger, but she could at least transport them without risking them bleeding out. That just left Naruto. The others are mostly stable for now. I need to stabilize Naruto before I can move him again, though. Bacta will be the best thing for him, and lots of it. Then I can start using the force to help him. She emptied 2 whole Bacta spray canisters over Naruto's body. Once the healing ointment was in place, she carefully wrapped as much of his exposed skin as she could in bandages from her medkit, and then settled into a more comfortable position. When she reached out with the force to start healing his body, though, she immediately gasped and jerked her hand back. There was some sort of foreign energy suffusing his body. Even to her force senses, it felt toxic and corrosive, with a heavy taint of the dark side. "What is it?" Ahsoka asked as she rushed to see what was wrong. Faye couldn't help but admire her continued bravery, despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. "Is he going to be all right? I need you to tell me what happened here, Ahsoka. If I'm going to help him, I'll need as much information as you can give me." The young Togruta nodded, though reluctance echoed in every tense line of her posture. Faye understood. She was asking her to relieve what were no doubt traumatizing events less than an hour after they had happened. In any other circumstance, she would have castigated herself for such cruelty, but there was a life at stake. Possibly more than one, as she sensed the same sort of energy in the wound on Ahsoka's abdomen. It was Aura Singh and a bunch of Mandalorians. We had just come out of hyperspace when they attacked our ship. I don't know why. They just wanted us dead, I guess. Naruto made Huyang and the rest of us get into the escape pods. He didn't go with you? Ahsoka shook her head. He stayed on the Crucible to protect us from the other ships. I think he used the other escape pods as weapons somehow. It looked like he made them blow up. Anyway, it worked, because no one shot us down. We saw him crash right after we landed. From Ahsoka's words, Faye's estimation of Naruto rose several notches. For a Padawan, and a fairly young one at that, to display such courage, selflessness, and ingenuity in the face of an unexpected attack was impressive. We tried to get to the crash site, but they got to us first. Aura Singh and the Mandalorians? Ahsoka nodded. We fought back, but they beat us. That's where most of us got hurt. Singh said she was gonna use us as bait for Naruto. Faye nodded as Ahsoka talked, half her focus still on healing the injured children. Even for someone of her skill and power, it was taxing to simultaneously heal multiple traumatic injuries on multiple patients. The vile energy coursing through Naruto's cells didn't help matters, either. It interfered with her healing, shredding the delicate patterns of the force she tried to weave around his body. Still, she managed, and even worked to help soothe the worst of Ahsoka's injuries while the girl told her story. Sweat beaded on her brow, and the beginnings of a price headache were already forming behind her eyes, but that was of no consequence right now. She was a healer, and she had injured patients. Everything else was secondary to that. I don't really know what happened next. When I woke up, they had us all hostage. Naruto was there. He was going to give himself up, until Vair. Ahsoka's voice cracked with grief when she said the name. Faye glanced up to see her eyes distant, tears running down her face in silent rivulets. Ahsoka, she prompted. Ahsoka, child, I need you to focus. You've been very brave so far. I need to know what happened next. Can you tell me, please? Ahsoka sniffled once and then took a deep, calming breath. Faye could practically see her seize all the grief and pain and lock them back under the surface. It wasn't healthy, and she would definitely need to meditate and deal with her emotions properly later, but it would do for now. Seeing such a display of inner strength, Faye raised her estimate of Ahsoka as well. It was no wonder the girl was still on her feet when all her comrades had fallen. There was a fire in her, a core of white-hot durasteel that refused to buckle. She had seen full-fledged knights with less determination than the young initiate before her. Vair was one of my clanmates. She tried to help Naruto, and they killed her. She pointed off to one side, and Faye followed her finger. A few dozen meters away, she could see a small form on the ground. It was wearing the typical robes of a Jedi youngling. She closed her eyes and sighed deeply, suddenly feeling every one of her 753 standard years. After that, something happened to Naruto, Ahsoka said. Her voice was rushing now, as if starting this story had somehow opened the floodgates, and she couldn't stop now until she had finished. There was a horrible feeling, killing intent, I think, but like nothing I've ever felt before. He had some kind of weird, red chakra coming out of him, and then he transformed. Transformed? Faye had heard of chakra from Master Yoda. He had taken the time to track her down and inform of the recent events at the temple. He hadn't said anything about it transforming its users, though. Ahsoka nodded and told her about how her friend had somehow turned into a rampaging monster. When she described how he had blasted the trench behind them with a single attack, Faye's jaw actually dropped. The idea of such power coming from a mere Padawan was difficult to comprehend. Still, this would explain the energy in his wounds, as well as the one he gave her. It must be the remnants of that chakra. Strange, though. It feels almost foreign, as if it doesn't belong to him. I'll have to contact the council. Perhaps they know something I do not. When Ahsoka finally finished recounting how Naruto had somehow regained control of himself and turned back, it was as though all the energy drained out of her. She swayed precariously on her feet, and Faye had to catch her with the force before she collapsed onto her face. Are they going to be all right, Master? She asked. Her voice was weak, but she still refused to pass out. Adrenaline, nervous energy, even the force had all long since stopped sustaining her. All that was left was sheer stubbornness and concern for her friend's welfare. Your friends should all recover, Ahsoka. Even Naruto. You can rest now. The final syllable had not even left Faye's lips before the battered Togruta finally closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Once she was unconscious, Faye stood up and carefully levitated all 6 of her patients into the air. Slowly, so as not to aggravate their injuries, she took them back to her ship and set them up as best she could. Her yacht had extensive medical facilities for a vessel of its size, specifically for circumstances like this, but even so, she would have to get them to a proper hospital as soon as she could. For the time being, she put Naruto in her Bacta tank and had the medical droid tend to the others. With that done, she went back outside and walked over to where Ahsoka had pointed earlier. Sure enough, she found the far too little corpse of a human youngling, a blaster hole burned through her neck. The girl had been small in life, and now looked positively tiny in death, a fragile bundle of could-have-beens that now would never be. Faye's eyes burned, and her vision blurred as tears threatened to escape her normally tight self-control. No matter how many dead children she saw, and Force knew she had seen thousands, it never grew any easier. She prayed it never would. With infinite care, she gathered Vair's body in her arms. No using the Force to carry this burden. There were some things that had to be done properly. She closed the girl's eyes and carried her back to the ship. Once she had carefully placed the body in the cargo hold, she checked in on the survivors before heading to the cockpit. It was high time she got her patients to a proper hospital and got in contact with the Jedi Council. She could feel in the Force that this wasn't over yet. Something larger was afoot, and the Order needed to know. Naruto had grown accustomed to waking up from being knocked out over the years. It probably said something depressing about his life, that he was used to regular bouts of involuntary unconsciousness, but he just considered it normal. So normal, in fact, that he had identified several distinct stages of regaining consciousness in such circumstances. Right now, he was in the calm, peaceful, numb stage, where nothing hurt and his mind was still too fuzzy to remember anything. His stay in those placid lagoons was always brief, however, and soon enough, clarity returned and dragged memory along with it. The attack on the Crucible. Fighting the Mandalorians. Vaer. Giving in to the QB, just as he had sworn he never would. Oh, Cammy. What did I do? He thought, panic rising in his throat. The others. Ahsoka. They're not Dash? I didn't dash? I have to find them. Have to help them. With one last effort, he wrenched his eyes open. Bright artificial lighting blinded him for a moment, but he ignored the inconvenience. Fighting against his stiff muscles, he kicked the blankets off of his legs and rolled clumsily out of bed and onto the cold, metal floor. Wait. Lights? Blankets? A bed? Where am I? He froze, confused, and, he was just realizing, badly sore. Various parts reported in, and the consensus was that sudden movement had definitely not been the best idea. In the haze of his still blurry vision, he could see a robed figure walking up to him. When he tried to reach out with the force and get a better feel for who it was, though, he couldn't. It was as though his control had reverted to what it was when he first came to the temple. He could feel the force, vaguely, but he couldn't grasp it. When he tried, it was like trying to squeeze a fistful of mud. It slipped and squeezed out between his fingers. He didn't have time to figure out what was going on, though, because the strange person had reached him and kneeled down by his side. Calm down, Padawan Uzumaki. You're safe now. I am Jedi Master Fei, a healer. You're in a hospital on Anshan. The figure, who he could now see was a young-looking woman of average height wearing Jedi robes, spoke in a soothing voice. Even with his connection to the Force screwed up, somehow, he could still sense her presence, gentle and nurturing, but with a depth to it that rivaled even Master Yoda's. M*FY. He tried to speak, but his throat felt as if it had been sanded raw and then coated in plaster. Even so, her name sounded familiar to him. He thought Master Windu might have mentioned her a few times. Some sort of wandering Jedi Master, practically a myth, even within the Order. Don't try to talk yet. You're still healing. She spoke in the same gentle, but vaguely reproachful tone that all doctors seemed to adopt with him. Now, I'm going to put you back in bed. Please try not to vault halfway across the room this time. Can you do that? He nodded. Normally, Naruto would buck against a doctor's instructions as a matter of principle, but some primal instinct told him that would be a bad idea with Master Fei. Something about her calm demeanor and gentle words told him she hadn't really been asking him. She had been informing him of the way things would be. That, coupled with the burning pain in his, everything really overrode his typical stubbornness when it came to hospitals. Fei gave him a small smile, as if she knew exactly what he had been thinking, and levitated him back into the bed. Once he was safely lying on the mattress, she walked off and returned with a cup of tea. Drink this. It should help your throat. The warm liquid did indeed soothe the ache in his throat. After a few gulps, Naruto felt up to trying speech again. Talking still hurt a little, and his voice was raspy and quiet, but he ignored it. There were questions he needed answered. My friends? Are they okay? Fei nodded. Ahsoka, Barriss, Nox, Trilla, and Galdos are all alive. Some of their injuries were rather severe, but I expect them all to make a full recovery. Professor Huyang backs up his memory banks to the temple archives before every gathering, and I'm even told portions of his databanks survived the damage inflicted on him. He'll need a new body, but he will be fine. A small mountain lifted itself from Naruto's chest when he heard that. He closed his eyes and sighed in relief. They're okay. They're okay. Thank the Force. He basked in the relief of knowing his friends had survived for a whole minute, before he moved on to the next question. It wasn't one he wanted to ask, but he had to. He knew the answer, but he needed confirmation. The words didn't want to form properly, though, and he had to swallow hard and take several more gulps of tea. Finally, he managed to croak out a single word. It fell out of his mouth like a lump of volcanic stone, heavy and tasting like ash. Vire? Faye's forlorn sigh was all the answer he needed. Whatever tiny hope he'd clung to that his sister had, somehow, survived, shriveled and crumbled to dust. All the breath left his lungs in a rush. I'm truly sorry, Padawan, but Vire didn't make it. I recovered her body from Rago. There was nothing anyone could have done to save her. Her words were kind, but Naruto barely heard them. The last image he had of Vire, that of her eyes going blank as the life left her body, dominated his mind. He couldn't cry, he couldn't yell, he couldn't even get angry. All he could do was just sit there and try to process the fact that Vire was dead. The idea scarcely seemed real. It was almost like a bad dream. He would have given anything for it to be a bad dream, but it wasn't. He could only dwell on it for so long, though. Eventually, his mind drifted back to the real world, if only to get away from that awful memory. He noticed a hand on his shoulder and felt a faint sense of comfort coming from Master Faye. It didn't remove the pain, exactly, but, for the moment, it was a little easier to bear. Take heart, Padawan, she said, a world of empathy in her voice. I know it hurts, but you cannot give in to despair. Naruto didn't trust his voice yet, so he just nodded silently. It took a few deep, shuddering breaths, but he finally regained his composure. Once he had done that, he looked around the room. Immediately, he spotted his lightsaber laying on the bedside table. Somehow, he hadn't sensed it earlier. To his surprise, he was not the only patient in the room. Ahsoka lay in a bed on the other side of the room, wrapped in bandages and sound asleep. He had been so disoriented when he first woke up, he hadn't even noticed her. How is she? He nodded towards Ahsoka. Resting, for now. It's the best thing for her. She'll be asleep for a while, yet. Where's everyone else? He asked. It was odd, he thought, that just he and Ahsoka were in the room. There was room for at least 2 more beds. If you're talking about the other younglings, they're in a separate recovery room. Healer Bant is seeing to them. I thought it best to treat you and Ahsoka here separately. Naruto frowned. Why? Because you both had traces of dangerous chakra contaminating your wounds. It was interfering with my healing techniques. In fact, it's still disrupting your connection to the Force. Your godfather tells me it was residual chakra from the Kyuubi. I needed a controlled environment in order to remove it. Naruto's mouth moved silently for a moment as he processed what she had said. He told you? Oh, I didn't give him, or the council, much choice in the matter. They had information I needed to heal my patients. A note of something, not hard, perhaps, but unyielding, crept into Faye's voice. For a moment, Naruto was glad he hadn't tried to ignore her earlier. Then the full implications of her statement dawned on him. Wait. The fox's chakra is messing with my Force abilities? Faye nodded. It seems so. I'm not an expert on chakra, let alone the Kyuubi, but it appears that trace amounts remain in your system whenever you use its power. Jiraiya told me they're harmless to you, but they do apparently interfere with your connection to the Force. I believe your body is naturally generating its own chakra in an attempt to absorb the Kyuubi's chakra safely. Don't worry, it isn't permanent. I've removed much of it already. It should only take a few days for you to process the rest of it. Less if I keep helping. And Jiraiya-sensei is here? Of course. Jiraiya told me he got your toad, whatever that means, and alerted the council at once. I arrived on Rago only 2 hours before they would have. Master Yoda and Master Windu accompanied him here, along with Healer Bant. They wanted to speak with you as soon as you woke up, in fact. Do you feel up for that? That brought Naruto up short. The idea of facing Jiraiya and Master Yoda, let alone Mace, was unpleasant, to say the least. He didn't want to see the disappointment in their eyes, and they would be disappointed. How could they not be? He had broken his promise never to use the Kyuubi's power. He'd failed to keep his old clanmates safe. They trusted him with a solo mission, and he'd screwed it up so spectacularly there probably weren't words to describe it. How can I face them now? How can I face any of them? Master Faye must have read the anguish on his face, or perhaps in his mind, because she tapped him lightly on the forehead to get his attention. It's up to you, of course, but you should know something. Bad news does not get better with time. Delaying facing your problems does not eliminate them. It only puts off solving them. Naruto hesitated for a long moment, but her words made too much sense. It was the same thing he'd told himself for years back in Konoha. Drive forward. Act. No matter what, keep moving. That attitude had, eventually, propelled him from being an orphan everyone hated to being a chunin of his village and the apprentice of Jiraiya of the Sannin. If he had managed that, then he could manage this. After all, he was Naruto Uzumaki. I can talk to them, he said. Send them in. It was a solemn-looking group that came into his room. Well, Mace was almost always solemn, but Jiraiya and Master Yoda both looked unusually grave. Jiraiya smiled when he saw him, though, and Yoda's ears twitched upwards. Even Mace's semi-permanent scowl softened at the edges for a moment, and Naruto thought he might have felt a glimmer of relief through their bond. It was hard to tell with his connection to the Force so unstable, but it still let him relax a little. They didn't look happy, but they also weren't looking at him like the adults back in Konoha once had. He didn't know if he could have handled seeing eyes like that again. Not now. Not from them. Jiraiya took one look at him and reached out to ruffle his hair. His warm, calloused hand felt safe and familiar. Naruto unconsciously leaned into it, heedless of the other masters in the room. Neither of them said anything. They didn't have to. They were family, after all. Just being there was enough. Master Fei fiddled with a panel on the wall, and a faint barrier shimmered into place around his bed, dividing the room. The faint sounds of the hospital, distant beeps, footsteps, and even the sound of Ahsoka's breathing vanished. A privacy barrier then, so no one could overhear their conversation. Good it is to see you awake, young Naruto, Yoda said. Strong enough, are you, to answer some questions? Yes, Master. Start by telling us what happened, Mace said, his voice flat. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Any detail may be important. Naruto winced a little at having to relive the ordeal, but he didn't argue. He just wanted to get it over with. He was going to have to tell them what happened eventually. Now was as good a time as any. So he told them. It was easier than he thought it would be, almost like reading a script. He got through the ambush over Rago without pausing. His fights with the Mandalorian warriors and Aura's message, too. Vair's murder, though, proved too much. That part choked him up as he tried to tell it. The words just wouldn't come. Even his voice wanted nothing to do with that memory. When he finally managed to relate how she had died, Yoda seemed to age a dozen more centuries. Mace's face became even more inscrutable than usual, a totally blank wall of stone. Naruto could feel the distant whispers of his sadness and anger, before he mastered those two. Jiraiya just looked tired. After that, things got even harder. It wasn't just that Naruto was reluctant to talk about using the Kyuubi's chakra, although he was. He also didn't have the proper words to describe what he had experienced. It wasn't the sort of experience he could easily describe. Eventually, though, he finished. Silence reigned for a long while until Yoda finally spoke. Been through a terrible ordeal you have, Padawan. Well, you did, in protecting the younglings, he said, before his ears dropped. However, what happened with the Kyuubi, serious it is. Jiraiya shot him a glare and made to say something, but a raised hand from Yoda silenced him. A horrible situation it was. Know this we do. Many Jedi bush the dark side at times they do. For you, though, Naruto, more serious this is. Grave danger is there in your power, if use it in anger you do. Naruto nodded miserably. I know, Master. I was just so angry. I couldn't stop it. A dangerous connection to the Force, you made. Debate on what to do about this, the council must. He had figured as much. At any other time, Naruto might have bristled at the idea of the council putting him under a microscope, again, but right now he was too numb to even be annoyed. So much had happened in such a short period that he couldn't do much more than just nod and accept it. Hell, he probably deserved whatever punishment they would think up, given how badly he had failed. He was so caught up in his own head that he didn't even notice Yoda had moved until he felt the old goblin's jimmer stick smack him in the elbow. Ow! What was that for? Being foolish, you were. Dwelling on the past, yes. Allow misery to rule your mind, you must not. Punish you, the council will not. Teach you, we will. Help you through this, we will. Naruto just stared at him, stunned. What was the wizened grandmaster talking about? He'd criffed up worse than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd gotten Vair killed. He'd used the fucking dark side, for Criff's sake. How was he not going to be punished? In what seemed to be a trend lately, he once more found himself speechless. Yoda sighed and stepped back. Go now, I must, to arrange the council meeting. Much to meditate on, there is. Stay here, Jiraiya and Master Windu will. Rest, young Naruto. With that, he turned and hobbled through the privacy field and out of the room. Naruto just shook his head, still reeling from recounting the event and Yoda's words. To his surprise, neither Mace nor Jiraiya made any move to leave with Yoda. When he looked at his master, the same man who'd recommended him for a solo mission after just 2 years as a Padawan, the man who trusted him to safely escort his former clanmates on their gathering, guilt flooded his chest like poison. I'm sorry, master, he whispered. Mace raised an eyebrow and tilted his head. Sorry? What are you apologizing for, Padawan? He paused and swallowed hard. I failed you. You trusted me with this mission, and I failed. Mace sighed and sat at the foot of Naruto's bed. For a while, he didn't say anything, and just stared at the opposite wall. Finally, just when Naruto thought he would sit there in silence for eternity, he spoke. You didn't fail me, Naruto. His words came slowly, he was obviously choosing them with great care. Nevertheless, Naruto could feel the conviction behind each one of them. You didn't fail me, he repeated. There was no way for you to have predicted that attack. You reacted as well as any Jedi could have, and better than most. It is because of you that Ahsoka, Barriss, Galdos, Nox, and Trilla are alive right now. Do not forget that. But Vair. Naruto clenched the blanket in his fist so tightly it tore. His teeth clenched, and tears filmed his eyes again. Only when Jiraiya placed a warm hand on his back did he relax, letting out a shuddering breath. Vair's death wasn't your fault, Naruto, Jiraiya said. You did everything you could, everything I would have had you do. I know it doesn't help right now, but there truly was nothing else you could have done. He is right, Mace said, before his face hardened a little. But I will not lie to you. I am disappointed and concerned that you used the Kyuubi's power. I have told you before, the Jedi have great power. That means we must always use that power wisely. Always. There cannot be exceptions. That had Naruto frowning. He knew that. Didn't Mace know he knew that? It wasn't that simple. I know, Master. They murdered her right in front of me. I couldn't just let that. I didn't even think. Mace looked at him, and somehow, Naruto just knew what he was about to say. He could see it coming, and, for the first time since he woke up, an emotion other than grief flared up in him. Naruto, I know Vair's death was painful, but dash. Don't! Both Jiraiya and Mace flinched at his shout. He even surprised himself a little at how loud it was, but he couldn't help it. After sitting there, numb, this whole time, the sudden anger burned like a fire. It probably wasn't fair to his master, and it definitely wasn't the Jedi way, but Naruto didn't care. He needed to say this. Don't give me some stupid platitude. It hurt, but you should release your feelings into the Force. Or maybe, the dead become one with the Force. It isn't the Jedi way to mourn them. Rejoice for them, instead. Don't you dare say something like that right now. Naruto-Jiraiya started. No. I'll let you know when I'm finished, he cut off his godfather before turning his attention back to Mace. The older Jedi was frowning at him, but Naruto was past caring about that. Don't you dismiss her like that. Vair mattered. She was my sister. Her life mattered. Her death mattered. It's supposed to hurt. Don't ever tell me I shouldn't hurt when family dies. Mace's eyes widened a little when he called Vair his sister, but otherwise he said nothing. Some small part of Naruto, beneath the anger and grief, was grateful for that, at least. Whatever fine threads of self-control he had left at this point would not survive him being interrupted. I shouldn't have used the fox's power, I admit that. It was dumb and dangerous. But I will never be okay with someone getting murdered in front of me. Jedi are supposed to care about people. That means caring when they're gone, too. When Naruto had finished speaking, all the energy left his body. He slumped back against his pillows as the sudden flare of righteous anger died down. In a way, he missed the sensation. It hadn't been fair, or Jedi-like, but it had at least been something. Something other than the numb grief and guilt he felt now, a warm island in that bleak, gray sea. It was tempting to just close his eyes and retreat back into his own mind, but he didn't. He wanted to see how Mace reacted to what he had said. Rude and unfair or not, Naruto stood by every word. For a long time, Mace said nothing. He just stood silently, giving nothing away on either his face or through their bond. 5 seconds soon became 30, then a minute, then 3. Finally, just when Naruto was sure his master would leave without a word, Mace sighed, his shoulders slumping a little. "You are right," he said. It took a moment for the words to fully process in Naruto and Jiraiya's mind. "Ha, I am?" Naruto straightened again and tried to keep from gaping in surprise. Of all the responses he had expected, from an angry lecture to cold dismissal, this one had not even crossed his mind. He peered closely at Mace's face, looking for some sign of a trick, but he found nothing but the usual grim seriousness. "You are right," Mace repeated. "I should not have tried to say that. Vair did matter, her death should be mourned, and it was wrong of me to suggest otherwise. I did not mean to insult your attachment to her, and for that, I apologize." Naruto lost the battle to keep his jaw from dropping. Technically, Mace was speaking perfectly understandable basic. All the words made sense, and they were in the right order, but coming from him, they just seemed impossible. It was like watching Obi-Wan volunteer to fly a starship, or seeing Ashoka eat vegetables. Physically possible, but utterly incongruous with the normal proceedings of the universe. Jiraiya recovered the power of speech first. "You are apologizing for insulting an attachment? That's unexpected. The last few years have given me much to think about." He turned back to face Naruto, who was still trying to figure out if his ears were giving accurate reports to his brain. "Naruto, do you remember when I said you might teach me just as much as I teach you?" Naruto nodded. "I remember. During your time as my Padawan, I've seen how much strength you draw from your attachments to your friends. I will admit, at first, I thought it would prove to be a problem, a dangerous temptation towards the dark side. You proved me wrong though, and it would be dishonest of me not to acknowledge that." Naruto winced and looked down. "But I did fail. You said it yourself, I chose to use the Kyuubi's power. I should never have done that." "No, you should not have," Mace said, but something in his voice dragged Naruto's eyes back up to his. He saw no condemnation, nothing but calm acceptance and reassurance there. "But you slipped up during a moment of terrible stress, in a situation no one could truly prepare for. It was a grievous mistake, but a mistake is all it was." Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but Jiraiya beat him to it. "Kid, you can't beat yourself up over this. Trust me, it'll eat you alive from the inside, until you're so twisted up you don't even recognize yourself. Grieve, but don't wallow in guilt and self-pity." It sounded so easy, the way Jiraiya put it, but Naruto just couldn't see how. "But she's dead," he said. He didn't add, "and it's my fault," but the words still seemed to echo around the privacy field. "Yes, she is," Naruto, Mace said. "Nothing can change that. The only thing you can control now is how you respond to this. What do you think Vair would want you to do? Lose yourself in grief, isolate yourself from your friends, and let this overwhelm you? Or would she want you to remember her life, rather than just her death? You knew her best. Meditate on that while you rest. I trust you will find the right answer." Mace reached over and squeezed Naruto's shoulder before he turned and walked out of the privacy field. Master Fei followed him out of the room. Jiraiya watched him go with a small smile on his face. "Damn kid, I gonna get jealous if he keeps giving you good advice before I can." A brief snort of laughter escaped Naruto's lips, surprising him. It hadn't even really been that funny of a joke. Still, it was a relief to know that jokes still existed, even after everything he had just gone through. The laugh may have been short, but it felt like a warm breeze on a wintry day. You really think it wasn't my fault, Jiraiya-sensei? I know it wasn't, Naruto. And I'll keep telling you that until you believe it, even if I have to chisel it into your thick skull. You hear me? I hear you. He wasn't sure if he could believe him yet, but, for now, it was enough to know someone else believed it for him. Omake, Ahsoka's Hunt 5. The Akul was proving to be every bit as fearsome a foe as Ahsoka had heard. As she dodged and wove around its claws, she felt as if she were locked in a deadly dance. Every second brought another brush with death, and each one felt as if it were closer than the last. The force and her natural agility had kept her alive so far, but she could feel exhaustion creeping in, stealing the strength from her limbs and blunting her reactions. Already, she had taken 2 more glancing blows, leaving shallow cuts along her left shoulder and across her forehead. That wasn't to say the fight was completely one-sided. Her spears darted out again and again, like wasps harassing an intruder. As she jumped backwards away from a bite, she managed to jab the Akul in the snout, leaving a nasty cut across its face. A few seconds later, she sank one of her spears into its right forepaw. It howled in agony and flung her away. Once again, she summoned her weapon with the force, tearing an even larger wound as she did so. Despite those small victories, she could feel the fight turning against her. The Akul may have been young, but it was still a large animal. What injuries she'd inflicted on it were far less crippling than the ones it had inflicted upon her. The initial cut on her leg was particularly concerning. The blood loss was not doing her stamina any favors. It was not unlike sparring against Naruto. She might land a few glancing blows, even some serious ones, but, in the end, she couldn't hope to match her opponent's endurance. Wait a second, she thought, in the small part of her brain not totally consumed by the ongoing fight for her life. That's it. This is exactly like fighting Naruto, only the Akul can't use any dirty tricks. But I can, and there's one that Goldie always used to fall for. Her plan was risky. If it bordered on insanity, it was only because it had gone so far over the line as to approach it again the long way round. However, as the Akul's claws came within 0.5 millimeter of ripping her face off again, Ahsoka knew it was the best chance she had. So, when the next strike came in, she pulled in the force and jumped backwards, putting as much space between her and the Akul as possible. Even with her injured leg, she put a good 30 meters between them. When she landed, she swallowed hard and braced for what was about to come. For the entire fight, she'd done her best to stay as close to the Akul as possible. Part of it was to allow her to use her spears without risking them breaking in a throw. The other part had been to avoid exactly what she now hoped to encourage. Sure enough, when it spotted the new distance between them, the Akul coiled its powerful muscles and pounced. Rather than dodge it, Ahsoka instead stood her ground as 100 kilograms of orange-haired alpha predator dropped towards her like a ballistic missile. Then, in the tiny fraction of a second before it smashed her into paste, she fell backwards and raised her spears. She had timed it almost perfectly. Rather than crushing her and tearing out her throat, the Akul found itself with its mouth biting at the shaft of a spear, while another stabbed into its chest. It couldn't even yowl properly around its mouthful of wood. However, it wasn't quite a perfect victory. For a moment, Ahsoka thought she'd pulled it off. She felt the spear enter the Akul right in its chest, just as she'd planned. Then, in what could only be described as the universe shitting on her, she felt it jam against one of the beast's ribs and deflect away from its heart. She'd still wounded it, maybe even mortally so, but it wasn't the near-instant death she'd needed. Now, instead of an Akul laying on her and bleeding out in seconds, she had one still very much alive and mad with pain trying to bite her face off. Overall, things could have gone better. Even as its lifeblood drenched her clothes, the Akul growled and strained to sink its teeth into her throat. The haft of her spear was tough, and it was lodged so that the beast couldn't properly close its powerful jaws and bite it in two, but she could still hear it splintering. Those teeth, each one as large as one of her eyes, slowly crept closer and closer. Even with the force multiplying her strength, her left arm still trembled as she tried to keep its jaws away from her. Her other hand scrabbled against her leg as she tried to pull it free and buy herself some more time. Even a few seconds would be enough. She could do a lot with a few seconds. To start with, she could use them to live longer in. Just as she managed to pull her right arm free, she felt her hand brush against something hard on her thigh. It took a moment until she realized what it was: the knife Naruto had made for her birthday. In all the excitement, she'd forgotten she even had it. Earlier, it had proven useful in crafting her spears. Now, it was the key to saving her life. As the Akul pushed its deadly maw ever closer to her vulnerable throat, Ahsoka pulled the knife out of its sheath, stabbed it just under the beast's rib cage, and pushed it down as far as she could reach. It cut through the flesh and hair like flimsy. The Akul screeched in terrified agony as blood and viscera spilled out of its body and covered her in gore. She shuddered at the sensation, but revulsion took a back seat to disgust as the high-pitched shriek turned into a slow death rattle. Within seconds, the Akul slumped over and breathed its last. Ahsoka lay under its body, too exhausted to move. An eviscerated Akul made for a deeply unpleasant blanket, but there was no way she could shift it off her. She didn't know how long she lay there, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before she sensed the familiar presence of Master T moving closer. Shortly after she first felt her, she heard twigs snapping from off to her right, followed by a desperate voice. "Ahsoka!" She felt the crushing weight of the Akul lift off her chest as the beast's body floated into the air. "Ahsoka, are you all right?" She coughed as her lungs reinflated and rubbed her aching ribs. All right seemed like a stretch, but she was at least alive. "I think so." "Everything hurts." Shock's face loomed into view above her. The normally imperturbable master looked distinctly perturbed. Worry drew lines across her face, and she immediately began checking Ahsoka over for injuries. "Are you hurt anywhere?" "Ahsoka, you need to talk to me." "Are you bleeding?" "Meow." She made the mistake of trying to sit up. Shock probably would have stopped her, but bruised ribs did the job first. "My leg. Everything else is minor." Shock moved down to examine her leg, muttering the whole time, and inhaled sharply when she saw where the Akul's claws had first caught her. "I have to clean this out before I put any Bacta on it." "Brace yourself. This will sting." Ahsoka grit her teeth as Shock poured some sort of antiseptic into the cuts on her leg. She hadn't realized until that moment how deep they were. The sharp fire of the antiseptic traced 2 cuts halfway through the muscle of her thigh. It was a minor miracle the Akul hadn't nicked an artery. Her breath came in harsh pants as she fought not to cry out. Finally, the burning subsided, and the cool numbness of Bacta took its place. When she looked down, Shock was wrapping a bandage around her leg. "That hurt worse than the claws did," she complained. Shock gave her a wan smile, but didn't stop tending to her. "I did tell you it would sting, young one." After a few more seconds, she tied off the dressing and nodded, apparently satisfied Ahsoka wasn't in immediate danger. "Can you stand? There's a stream just over there you can wash in." "Oh, thank the Force," Ahsoka said as she shot to her feet. It hurt, but the chance to clean the Akul innards off her skin was worth a little pain. Shock helped her limp to the stream, and she slid into the water with a satisfied grunt. "Sith spit, that's cold. Ahsoka." Shock tried to give her a recriminatory glare, but the smile tugging at her lips rather ruined it. Ahsoka couldn't help but laugh at the sight. "Honestly. First, I find you half crushed and covered in Akul guts, now I catch you swearing? Speaking of which, didn't I say something about not fighting in Akul? I was very explicit, as I recall. It wasn't my fault, Master, I swear." Ahsoka said, waving her hands as if she could ward off any incoming lectures. Togruta didn't have eyebrows, but Shock nevertheless managed a look of skepticism to put even Obi-Wan's finest arched brow to shame. Ahsoka remained undaunted, however. "Really? I wasn't planning on fighting in Akul. I hunted a Lursu, but that bastard started stalking me. It attacked me. I was just defending myself. Honestly." Shock looked at her for a long moment before she sighed and shook her head. "I swear. You and Naruto both attract trouble like stars attract planets, and you're both too hard-headed to back down from it. If you two manage to survive your own stubbornness long enough to grow up, I think you'll both wind up changing the galaxy. Or, possibly, lighting it on fire." Ahsoka snorted and slipped lower into the stream. It may have been bone-chillingly cold, but it was also clean and refreshing. The blood and other bits of the Yakul sluiced off and washed away downstream. It wasn't until her hands and feet started going numb that she crawled out of the burbling snowmelt and stood shivering on the bank. The slight breeze suddenly bit as deep as a winter blizzard, but she did her best to ignore it and pulled the force into her body. She'd come a long way in the last 2 years, and it took her only a second to generate chakra. It took a bit longer to mold it into fire chakra, but once she did, a comforting warmth suffused her body. Steam plumed off her clothes as the water rapidly evaporated. Impressive, Ahsoka. I didn't know you'd started on elemental manipulation, Shak said. Now come. We have a ceremony to conclude. 2, in fact. 2, you did take down 2 trophies on your hunt. Shak smiled. The Lursu alone would have earned you your sash, but you also slay an Yakul in single combat. Its teeth are yours. Something in Ahsoka's mind went sproink and her brain just froze. She couldn't have heard right. The Lursu antlers already would have been an honor, but Yakul teeth. What? Congratulations, Ahsoka. I believe you're the youngest Togruta in living memory to earn an Yakul tooth headdress. I'm proud of you. I trust you remember the ceremony. A smile crept across Ahsoka's face as her brain finally rebooted. In her excitement, she tried to bow and nod at the same time, and nearly fell over. Yes, Master. I remember. She retrieved Naruto's knife and washed it clean. Once it was no longer stained with gore, she dragged both her kills next to each other. As tradition dictated, the Lursu was first. She carved the antlers from its head and set them aside. Then, she cut a piece of flesh from its heart and ate it raw. For humans, it would have been disgusting, but to her it tasted delicious. She repeated the ceremony with the Yakul, first removing its teeth and then eating a piece of its heart. When she was done, her teeth and lips were stained with blood, and she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Well done, Ahsoka. As your elder, I decree you have succeeded in your hunt and passed the rite. I present you with your sash, as a symbol of your coming of age. Wear it with honor. Shak reached into her robes and presented her with a purple sash. It was shaped a little like an elongated diamond and covered in an intricately woven design. She took it reverently and hooked it in place on the front of her skirt. Thank you, Master. You did very well, Ahsoka. You've earned this. I'll help you make your headdress on our way back to Coruscant. Ahsoka smiled mischievously. I can't wait to see the look on Naruto's face when he sees me wearing Yakul teeth. Shak was as good as her word, and by the time they got back to the temple, her new headdress was firmly affixed to her head, right where her mantrals met her scalp. She'd decided to keep the traditional Togruta clothes as well, though she'd added a pair of white leggings and a set of boots and elbow-length gloves in the same burgundy material as the skirt and top. Her purple sash hung from her belt at the front of her skirt. She preferred her new outfit to the standard Jedi tunic. It was less restrictive, and it reminded her of the heritage she had earned, and therefore had to uphold. The second she entered the temple, she could tell Naruto had returned from his mission. The symphony of his presence was unmistakable. It filled the halls of the temple with silent music only she could hear and had her racing down the ramp to track down its source. Shak didn't even bother calling after her as she sprinted off to find her best friend. As usual, he was easy to locate. She followed his force signature until she wound up at the door of one of the temple's engineering workshops. There was another presence in with him, and even without the force, she could have guessed who it was. Sure enough, when she opened the door, she saw Naruto and Anakin leaning over what looked like a partially disassembled speeder engine of some sort. They were both covered in grease and other muck, and, of course, so engrossed in their project, they completely failed to notice her entrance. At least, that was what she was supposed to think. For no immediately apparent reason, she grabbed a large scrap of intake fan blade with the force and threw it over her head and into the wall above the doorway. Rather than the clang of metal meeting Duracrete, she heard the dull thump of soon-to-be bruised flesh. Ouch! Damn it, Sokka! The real Naruto and Anakin fell to the ground from where they'd been hiding above the door and landed in a groaning tangle of limbs. A few balloons full of brightly covered paint told her all she needed to know about what their plans had been. The two imposters working on the engine vanished in twin puffs of smoke. Really? She looked down at the would-be pranksters and smirked. Paint balloons. What, are you two 5 years old? I just got back from my first ever hunt. I immediately came to see you too, and this is how you want to greet me? Ah, don't be like that, Snips. Anakin finally managed to disentangle himself from Naruto and stood up. We were just, checking your situational awareness. Aha. Tell her, Naruto. What? Oh, that's right. We wanted to make sure you hadn't gotten sloppy after missing training for a few days. Their looks of wide-eyed innocence might have been a lot more convincing if it hadn't been for the fluorescent green and pink paint dripping from their hair. She just shook her head and snorted. You're both idiots. I don't know why I put up with you two. That probably would have been the start of a productive session of bickering and friendly banter, but Naruto took the chance to wipe the paint out of his eyes and froze when he actually got a good look at her. Wow, he stuttered, before his eyes landed on her forehead. Wait, are those cool teeth? Yep. Real ones? Yep. Before she could react, he ran forward and wrapped her in a huge, and, sadly, paint-splattered hug. That's so awesome. You killed in a cool. Tell me everything. So, she did. As they smiled and laughed and joked back and forth, she felt any worries about the future fade away. For now, there was warmth, light, and happiness, and she got to share them with the people she cared for. She was home. Chapter 33. When Mace exited his Padawan's hospital room, his mind was so turbulent he was scarcely aware of his surroundings. Despite the calm reserve he showed on his exterior, inside he was a mass of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He hadn't felt this unbalanced since he'd first taken Deppa on as his Padawan, and had to face being suddenly responsible for the health and education of a child. With a deep breath, he sought to separate and master each of his wild emotions independently. It was a meditation technique he had developed decades ago, for when his control truly threatened to slip. Foremost among his feelings was anger. Mace knew he was too prone to anger, and had been ever since he was a boy. It was a part of him, an old adversary he had long since accepted. Even then, this rage he felt now surprised him. Aura Singh had attacked Naruto. Injured a group of younglings. Killed a child. A Jedi youngling. Not just any Jedi youngling, but his Padawan's close friend and adopted family. Mace hadn't known Vair very well, but he knew Naruto had considered her his younger sister. That aside, she had been a Jedi youngling, and now she was dead. Murdered by a lowlife bounty hunter. How dare! He stopped himself. The inferno that lit in his chest threatened to burst forth and consume everything in its path, but he mastered it. Accepted it. It would not control him. Next, he felt relief. Relief that Naruto was still alive. Relief that only one initiate had perished. Mixed in with that relief was no small amount of shame, though. Naruto had had half the bones in his body broken and his skin burned off. Ahsoka had been savagely beaten. Barris and Galdos had nearly died. Vair had died. It felt selfish of him to rejoice amid such tragedy. Once again, he cut that poisonous train of thought off before it could gain traction. What had happened was terrible, yes, but not as terrible as it could have been. He would find what good he could among the bad, and count it dearer for all that. There was no point in punishing himself for his own feelings. To do so would be pointless and irresponsible. After the relief was apprehension. For all that both he and Yoda had said the council wouldn't punish Naruto, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. While Mace was confident that Naruto would not be expelled or any other such nonsense, there were still some on the council who cast a jaundiced glance at both him and Jiraiya. They believed the two former shinobi to be dangerous, and would use the incident on Rago as an excuse to restrict Naruto to the temple for close monitoring. Mace sympathized with their concerns, misplaced though they were, but he could not allow that. Naruto was not dangerous. The last thing he needed now was to be treated like a criminal. Somehow, Mace had to convince his fellow counselors that Naruto needed his guidance, not their censure. That brought him neatly to the final tangle of thoughts bouncing around his mind. For the whole time he had trained Naruto, Mace had been aware that his Padawan had a very different approach to emotions than most Jedi. At first, Mace had considered it foolish, bordering on outright dangerous. He'd spent his entire life mastering his emotions, separating himself from them, never once letting them fuel his actions. In scarcely 2 years, Naruto and Jiraiya had changed all that. Watching his Padawan shamelessly draw upon his every feeling, form an attachment to every being he met, and still manage to shine in the Force like a supernova, had forced Mace to doubt what he had once held as an unshakable truth. He hadn't realized just how much he had been questioning the Jedi Code until Naruto had berated him for trivializing Bayer's death just a minute ago. When the boy, young man, now, had finished yelling, Mace had found he couldn't disagree with him. It had taken all of his self-control as a Jedi Master not to let the shock register on his face when he realized he no longer agreed with the code to which he had dedicated his life. Even more surprising was the realization that he hadn't believed in it for some time. Mace wasn't about to start embracing every emotion he felt, he was far too reserved a man for that, but he found he no longer shied away from Jiraiya's philosophy as he once had. He couldn't pretend to condemn Naruto for his attachments when they so clearly gave him strength. After so long spent rejecting such things, trying to accept them now was daunting. Nevertheless, the Force told him this was the way forward. It felt as though some grand, cosmic shatterpoint, on a scale he had never seen before, was slowly spreading across the galaxy. He didn't know what would happen when it snapped, but he was sure it would change the Republic, and the Jedi, forever. Lost in thought, Master Windu? The unexpected voice almost made him jump through the ceiling, and sent his heart rate skyrocketing for a brief second, until he recognized the speaker. To his embarrassment, Mace had been so caught up in his own thoughts, he had neglected to mind his surroundings. "Forgive me. Did I startle you?" Master Fei asked from where she stood against the wall, unobtrusive despite her reputation. Mace thought he detected a glimmer of mischief in her eyes as she watched him recover from the shock she had given him. Anyone else might have missed it, but he had spent the past 2 years training Naruto Uzumaki. He knew that look anywhere. "A little," he admitted. "Can I help you, Master Fei?" "I had hoped to speak with you about your Padawan," she said, with just the faintest hint of disappointment. Some small part of Mace, the part that had been repeatedly subjected to Naruto's unique sense of humor, crowed in triumph at not rising to her bait. "He strikes me as a most unusual Jedi." "He is that," Mace said carefully. He wasn't sure where she was going with her questions. He knew of Master Fei's reputation, of course, but he didn't know her personally. "I have never seen a Jedi so emotional, yet so firmly rooted in the light. Even more remarkable when you consider what the boy has sealed inside of him." Mace glanced at her, but her face and body language gave nothing away. From any other master, he would have suspected them of making a veiled jab at Naruto, but Fei's words seemed entirely genuine. "Please, walk with me," she said. "Master Yoda should be a part of this conversation." Curious, and somewhat bemused, Mace followed her down the hall to the small waiting room Yoda had commandeered to contact Coruscant and arrange a council meeting. The Grand Master had apparently just finished making a holocall, judging by the glare he was leveling at the comm system. Technology and Yoda had never made good bedfellows. Yoda's ears twitched as they approached, and he looked up. When he saw Master Fei, the frown vanished from his face, to be replaced by a fond smile. "Good to see the both of you, it is. Young Naruto, how is he?" "As well as I could expect," Mace said. "He blames himself for what happened. I told him otherwise, as did Jiraiya, but it may be a while before he accepts that himself." "I believe his friends will help with that," Fei said. "He has strong bonds with those around them. I could sense how they strengthen him." "HRRMMH, good to hear, that is. More concerning, though, is his brush with the dark side. Look kindly on him using the Kyuubi's power, many will not." Mace spoke slowly, careful not to let his inner turmoil muddy his thoughts. "Naruto made a dangerous mistake, yes, but he is no closer to falling now than he was a week ago. I am concerned some of the other counselors will be unduly harsh towards him." Yoda nodded, and his ears drooped a few centimeters. Mace sympathized with his weariness. Over the years, debates over Naruto and Jiraiya had occupied a disproportionate amount of the council's time. The continued resistance of so many masters towards the two former shinobi, even if it came from a place of genuine caution, had grown tiresome. As more and more knights, and even some masters came around to Jiraiya's philosophy, the conservative factions within the order only grew louder. Serious this debate will be. But, since I do, that's something to say you have, Master Fei. The ageless woman dipped her head slightly, as if she had expected Yoda to guess her purpose. I do, Master. It is not a perfect solution, but I believe it will satisfy the more wary council members. More importantly, I believe it will help Naruto come to terms with what happened on Rago. An interest in Naruto you have developed, HRRM? The Force tells me he is important, both to the Jedi and the galaxy as a whole. It was difficult, but I was able to peer through the veil of the dark side and glimpse his future. Mace inhaled sharply at that. Such glimpses were nearly impossible, and had been for years. Only future events of monumental import were still discernible through the veil, and even those were little more than vague shapes in the clouded waters. His estimation of Fei's skills rose sharply, if she could still glean even a hint at an individual's future. This is a tipping point for Naruto, she continued. One of many to come. More importantly, he is in pain, and I am a healer. It is my duty to help him. How do you suggest we go about it, then? Mace asked. I confess myself unsure of how to proceed. Fei's smile faded and her face grew serious. My suggestion is not without its risks. However, I believe it to be the best option we have. Tell me, are you familiar with the Jedi Temple on Lothal? She told them her plan. Mace frowned at first, but eventually agreed. She was right, it was risky, but it would also help Naruto. That made it worth any amount of risk in his eyes. Now there remained the simple issue of convincing the council. As he sat down and centered himself for the meeting, he couldn't help the sigh that escaped his lips. This was going to be a long day. Naruto and Jiraiya sat together in silence for a while. Jiraiya seemed content to just be there next to him, something for which Naruto was profoundly grateful. He'd had all the advice he could stomach for the moment. What he needed now, more than anything, was just not to be alone while he tried to find his answer to Mace's question. After a while, he didn't know how long, Master Fei came back into the room and deactivated the privacy field. Jiraiya, Master Yoda asked for your presence. He's in the waiting room down the hall. Jiraiya frowned and glanced down at Naruto. I'm not about to leave my godson alone right now. Of course not, Fei said, smiling. Her kind, soothing presence was almost surreal. I will sit with him. It's about time for another healing session, anyway. He will be safe in my care, I can promise you. Jiraiya still looked uncertain, but Naruto poked him in the arm. Go on, sensei. You heard her, I'll be fine. I won't even try to escape, I promise. It took a few seconds, but eventually, Jiraiya relented. Fine, brat. I'll go see what the boss wants. He paused on his way out the door and turned to Fei. Thank you, he said, for taking care of him. Of all of them. I'm grateful, truly. Fei gave him a tilt of her head. It was my pleasure. I believe it is a Jedi's duty to care for all who are in need, a sentiment I believe both of you share. It's good to see the next generation of Jedi carrying on that tradition, even if it annoys some on the council from time to time. Jiraiya grinned at that and threw her a cheeky salute before he strode out the door. Fei chuckled quietly to herself and shook her head before she walked over to Naruto. A most curious man, your godfather, she said as she pulled up a chair to sit beside his bed. Not a conventional, well, anything, I believe, but still a good man. A very good man. You would do well to heed his advice, if not always, I suspect, his example. It surprised him, a little, to hear her praise Jiraiya in such a way. Most Jedi Masters don't like him very much, or me. They think we're too emotional, too dangerous. He frowned and glanced over to where Ahsoka still slept. Maybe they're right. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Perhaps that is up to you, rather than them. She closed her eyes, and even with the residual chakra from the Kyuubi disrupting his connection to the Force, he could still feel her presence open up and drift. I foresee you could, indeed, walk a dark path. You could burn the galaxy to cinders if you so choose, and there would be little anyone could do to stop you. Naruto shivered at her words, but he dared not interrupt. She kept on speaking, her voice still calm, even as sweat beaded on her brow and her face creased with concentration. The force gathered around her, so thick he could almost see it. Equally, I foresee a different path, one of light. You can take all the obstacles you have faced, and all those yet to come, and forge them into a strength for the light like no other. There is darkness ahead. We cannot avoid it, but in that darkness, you could shine all the brighter. However you choose, you will sweep across this galaxy like a storm. Yours has never been a small destiny, Naruto Uzumaki. It merely remains for you to decide what it is. Faye opened her eyes, and the buildup of the force around her dissipated in an instant. Naruto stared at her, eyes wide, as she gasped for breath and wiped the sweat off her face. She looked pale, and her body seemed to sag weakly for a moment before she composed herself. When she reached for a glass of water, he noticed her hand trembling slightly, and moved to help keep her steady. "Thank you, Padawan," she said once she had finished drinking. "That took more out of me than I had anticipated." "That was what was that, Master?" he asked, even as he tried not to think about her words. Some of what she had said. I peered into the future. Your future, specifically. Naruto gaped at her, his jaw flapping loose. It had been all but impossible for even the council members to see more than a few weeks into the future for years now. Even Yoda could barely discern more than a few months ahead, and that was vague and indistinct. What Faye had just done involved looking forward years, maybe even decades. How did you? I thought the dark side was clouding the future. Faye nodded wearily. It is. Even when I narrowed my gaze to just you, that still took quite some doing. You don't live as long as I have without picking up a few tricks, though. I couldn't see any specifics, but what I said is true. You have a great destiny, for good or ill. So, I could go bad then. Naruto groaned, and buried his head in his hands. This was not what he wanted to think about right now. I am dangerous. He jolted when he felt a cool hand cup his jaw and tilt his face back up. Of course, you could fall, and of course you're dangerous, she said, and her voice held nothing but understanding and patience. He felt like an academy student again, with Irika-sensei slowly guiding him to some obvious conclusion that he had missed. Every Jedi can and every Jedi is. The point I was trying to make, though, is that you have a choice. Not everyone does, not always, but you do. That is the truly important thing I saw. It is now and will always be up to you which path you walk. But, what if I don't know which path is which? Naruto asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Faye smiled and brushed his hair back, away from his eyes. Then you can do what anyone who is so fortunate as to have friends and loved ones can do. She glanced over at Ahsoka for a moment and then back at him. You can ask for help. Just like that? She laughed, a high, clear sound that chased away the shadows and sparked an echo in himself. Just like that, Padawan. Now, let's get on with your healing session. The faster I can get that residual chakra out of your system, the better. Removing the remaining Bijou chakra from his body mainly involved Naruto sitting still while Faye held his head between her hands and meditated. He could feel her force presence working throughout his body, though even if his senses weren't muddled, he wouldn't have had any idea what she was doing. All he could tell was that her efforts were complex on a level beyond anything he had ever witnessed, let alone attempted, and remarkably effective. With each passing minute, Naruto felt his connection to the force grow stronger and clearer. By the end of the first hour, he felt light years better, though he still had a long way to go before he was back to normal. If his typical connection to the force felt like swimming in crystalline waters, this was more like fumbling in an alga-choked pool with his hands bound. After she had finished with him for the time being, claiming that it wouldn't be good to stress his system too much at once, she turned her attention to Ahsoka. While she repeated the process on the sleeping Togruta, the arrival of another familiar face served to distract Naruto. Bant, he said with a weak smile. It's good to see you. The Mon Calamari healer returned his smile before she gave him a critical once-over. It's good to see you too, Naruto. I wish it was under better circumstances, though. I've never seen a group of younglings in such rough shape, and I treated you after that time you and Anakin tried to build your own speeder engine out of scrap. Yeah. I should have protected them better. His face fell, and Bant gave him a sympathetic, and somewhat moist, pat on the arm. Nonsense. From what I gather, it's only thanks to you I have living patience at all. I don't know a single other Padawan your age who could have done better, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Now, let's see how healed you are. I'm fine now, Bant. She rolled her eyes, which was a sight to see from a Mon Calamari, and her gills fluttered in exasperation. Yes, I'm sure you think that. Now shut up and let me examine you. Naruto groaned, but gave in. It was a familiar back and forth between the two of them by now, and he took comfort in that familiarity. Grumbling under his breath, he took off his shirt and let her get on with whatever torturous nonsense she seemed necessary. He thought he might have heard a chuff of laughter from Master Fei, but when he glanced over, she looked just as serene as ever. How is everyone? He asked as she poked and prodded and poked some more. It was hard not to flinch at some of her gentle jabs. A few patches of skin were apparently still quite tender. Healing nicely. There shouldn't be any hold still. She shot him a gimlet eye, and Naruto immediately froze. There shouldn't be any permanent damage, though Barris and Guldos will need a few weeks of physical therapy. The drugs they used on Trilla had some nasty side effects, but were filtering them out. That's good. Even to his ears, his voice sounded wooden. It really was good news, and he really was pleased that none of them would suffer long-term injuries, but it didn't feel like the sort of thing he should celebrate. They should never have gotten hurt in the first place. Now I'm supposed to feel good that they'll only need a few weeks of physical therapy? How messed up is that? Before he could get sucked too deep into dark thoughts, a webbed hand slapped him lightly on the shoulder and pulled him back to reality. Bant's dark, bulbous eyes peered into his own. Empathy and understanding filled the liquid orbs, as if they could see the thoughts bubbling around in his mind. Celebrate whatever victories you can find, Naruto, Bant whispered. Trust me, it helps to search for the light in a bad situation. Don't go looking for the dark. There's enough of that already. He tried to respond, to deny that he was doing any such thing, but the words stuck in his throat. Eventually, he just nodded, if only to get her to stop looking at him like that. He was suddenly tired of seeing so much compassion in people's eyes. Good. Now, you still have plenty of microfractures throughout our skeleton, and your skin isn't completely finished regenerating yet. I won't make you take another soak in a Bacta tank, but I want you to promise you'll take it easy for the next few days. Get plenty of rest, and no strenuous activity. Got it? He groaned, but didn't dare argue. Not with Master Fei in the room. Defying Bant was one thing. Hell, he'd even risked ignoring Master Che in the past. Master Fei, however, scared the crap out of him. She reminded him a bit of a mix between Shizune and Tsunade, with the former's gentle disposition and the latter's terrifying power. Once she had satisfied herself that Naruto was, for once, going to follow the orders of his doctor, Bant moved over to Ahsoka's bed, and sent a gentle force nudge into her mind. Thanks to Master Fei's earlier healing, Naruto could just detect it on the edge of his force senses. It took a few minutes, just how tired had she been, but eventually she groaned and her blue eyes fluttered open. Judging by her voice, she was still groggy and disoriented from sleep, but Bant and Fei gently answered her muttered questions about where she was and what had happened. Naruto tuned them out, though. She obviously didn't know he was there, and he didn't want to accidentally overhear something he wasn't welcome to. After a few seconds, one of them activated another privacy field around Ahsoka's bed, muting their conversation and blurring their figures. Whatever questions she had and whatever tests Bant decided to run apparently didn't take very long, because the privacy field dropped after just a few minutes. She glanced over at him and gave him a brief, but very relieved, smile. Before she could say anything, though, Bant coughed to get her attention. I'll tell you the same thing I told Naruto, she said. Your injuries are still healing, so don't stress them. Try not to move too much, for now. If you feel tired, rest. If you feel sore, rest. If you need help, call for a healer. Either myself or Master Fei will be nearby. Do you understand? Ahsoka nodded, just as reluctantly as Naruto had, but it seemed to satisfy the two healers. Bant left, saying she had to go check on the others, but Fei lingered for another moment. I can sense you two have much to discuss, she said. Just remember, Jedi draw strength from each other as much as the Force. That has always been our greatest weapon against darkness. With that, she stepped out of the room, leaving Naruto and Ahsoka alone together. The moment the door slid shut, Ahsoka threw off her blankets and swung her bandaged legs off the side of the bed. With one hand braced against the wall for support, she struggled to her feet. Naruto's heart lurched when her legs trembled under her weight. Ahsoka! What are you doing? You're injured. You shouldn't be. The younger girl shot him a look, and Naruto's jaw clicked shut. It hadn't been a glare, exactly, but her eyes had burned with a fierce determination so strong it defied him to say a word against her. She was going to stand up and walk, that look said, and he, the healers, and the universe at large could get bent if they thought otherwise. Something warm kindled in his chest at seeing Ahsoka maintain her willful inner strength, even after everything she must have gone through. Step by wobbly step, she limped over to him. Several times he thought she might fall, but each time she stumbled, her willpower just burned brighter, and she righted herself and pushed on. Finally, she reached the side of his bed, panting and grimacing in pain, but still upright. Supporting herself with one hand in the bed frame, she reached out with the other and touched his face. Before he could ask what she was doing, she gasped and pulled him into an embrace. It was awkward, and the sudden movement cost Ahsoka her balance and forced him to support her weight, lest she wind up on the floor. Normally he could have taken her weight without issue, but as things were, he had to scramble not to wind up on the floor himself. Naruto had already been down there once today, and wasn't keen on making a return visit. In the end, she wound up lying in the bed, more or less on top of him. Their new position didn't seem to bother her in the least, judging by how she just hugged him tighter. The desperate embrace wasn't particularly comfortable, given his injuries, but he brushed that aside in favor of returning Ahsoka's hug. I thought you were going to die, she whispered, her breath tickling his cheek. You looked and you wouldn't wake up. I thought you were going to die. Naruto had to swallow a lump in his throat at the time of naked concern in her voice. Ahsoka so rarely showed any vulnerability, and he didn't know how to handle it. He gently patted her rear leg while he tried to come up with something comforting to say. Well, I'm still alive. He winced even as the words left his mouth. They sounded pathetic, but he didn't know what else to say. I'm fine, Sokka, really. She pulled back with a snort and glared at him. Naruto, I saw you. You had no skin. I watched your face split open. Don't tell me you're okay. Just don't. There really wasn't anything he could say to that, so Naruto just nodded and kept his mouth shut. Mentally, he braced himself for the inevitable question. He'd known it would come ever since he saw Ahsoka lying in the bed she had so recently abandoned. Now that she was awake, he knew it would be one of the first things she asked. Sure enough, a few seconds later, Ahsoka spoke. Her voice was slow and a little hesitant, but to him it felt as inescapable as the rising tide. Naruto, what happened back there? You turned into. I don't even know what to call it. I've never heard of anything like that before. What was it? It was the question Naruto had been anticipating, dreading even, ever since that night in the forest with Mizuki and Irika. Ever since he had found out about the Kyuubi. He'd imagined telling Ahsoka and the others plenty of times over the last 3 years, even wanted to, but he'd always pictured it being on his terms, not after they'd already glimpsed the demon sealed in his belly. Now that the time had finally come, he felt the familiar fear of rejection crawl up his spine and sidle into his brain. Visions of Ahsoka yelling at him, cursing him, and calling him a monster flitted through his mind. He took a shuddering breath, and his hands clenched into fists for a moment before he forced himself to relax. That's not easy to explain. It was an effort to keep his voice from trembling, but he managed it. Ahsoka inhaled sharply and moved so she was sitting up against his pillows, roughly facing him. I'm gonna need you to try. He squeezed his eyes shut and let his head fall back. When he said nothing, Ahsoka sighed. I know you have a lot of secrets, you and Jiraiya both, and that's fine. I understand that. But you can't just say nothing about what happened. He clenched his teeth and tried to take another calming breath. It didn't work. Ahsoka, it's not I just dash. Damn it, Naruto. Her voice was thick with emotion, but when he looked at her, she didn't look angry. Her eyes shine with the same determination from earlier, mixed with something else he couldn't identify. Without his empathic abilities, he was stuck trying to read her face, and Naruto had never been the best at reading girls. "I'm your friend," she continued, poking him in the chest with a slim, orange finger. "Why can't you talk to me? If it's something bad, I want to help you with it. I've told you before, don't tell me to leave you, and don't push me away. Please, just talk to me." When Ahsoka had finished talking, she was panting from the emotion she had put into her words. She looked at him steadily, her eyes alight, as if daring him not to answer her. It was the same look she'd had when she had faced down his four-tailed form and defied a demon armed with nothing but a borrowed lightsaber. Whatever protests and excuses he might have given died on his lips. Faced with determination like that, Naruto didn't think he had the strength to say no. Besides, if there was anyone in the galaxy to whom he was going to tell his biggest secret, it was going to be Ahsoka. He took one last, shaky breath, nodded, and took the plunge. Back on Tython, in my time, 50,000 years ago, there were 9 entities made up of pure, living chakra. They were the most powerful beings on the planet, maybe even the whole galaxy. All of them were walking natural disasters, with unlimited chakra and destructive power. We called them the Bijou, tailed beasts? Ahsoka asked, translating the phrase in her head. Naruto nodded and continued. They used to rampage through cities, destroying them and killing thousands. To stop them, my people sealed them into living vessels, humans who would contain the Bijou and act as living weapons for their village, called Jinchuriki. Once it's sealed into them, they can use the Bijou's power, but at a price. The chakra is incredibly toxic and difficult to control. Also, if the Bijou is ever removed or escapes from its host, the host dies. My mother was one of those people. She had the most powerful of the Bijou, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, sealed inside of her as a child. Ahsoka frowned, confused, but thankfully didn't say anything. Naruto was grateful for that, at least. It was hard enough for him to tell this story without interruptions. If he had to stop, he didn't know if he would have the strength to start up again. When a female Jinchuriki gives birth, the seal keeping the Bijou restrained weakens, apparently. Something to do with the mother's energy diverting to the baby or whatever. Anyway, on the night I was born, my father, the Yondaime Hokage, had to manually reinforce the seal to keep the Kyuubi from escaping and killing my mom. He managed it, but someone, I don't know who, was able to sneak past their security. I don't know what happened next, but somehow that person kidnapped my mother and released the Kyuubi. He had to pause there for a second while he struggled to control himself. His hands clenched the bed frame so tightly he actually bent the metal frame, and he bit his tongue by accident. The coppery taste of blood filled his mouth, but he was too angry to notice the sharp sting. Even 3 years after Jiraiya had told him about his parents, it still burned to know that someone, some piece of scum, had killed his mother, and he would never even know who they were. They'd murdered his mom, and for what? The monster sealed in his stomach. That thing had been worth his mom's life? What sort of fucked up evil? Naruto? A small hand touched his elbow, the sudden contact jolting him out of his anger. Ahsoka looked at him, concern and sympathy filling her gaze in equal measure. He took a deep breath and used one of the many meditations techniques Mace had taught him to bring his anger back under control. It took a few tries, and even then, he could still feel it bubbling in the back of his mind, but eventually Naruto felt calm enough to continue. "Thanks," he said, and she nodded and smiled for a moment. Anyway, the Kyuubi rampaged across the village. It killed thousands, maybe more. Nothing can kill it, and no one could stop it. My dad was dealing with whoever had taken my mother, and no one else could defeat it. Eventually he must have won, because he showed up, pinned it down, and then he sealed it into you, didn't he? Ahsoka asked, her eyes wide and horrified. Naruto nodded once. Yeah, that's awful. Why would he do that to you? Heh, Naruto chuckled bitterly. I asked the same question. It turns out my mom's family, the Uzumaki clan, were some of the only people who could actually hold the Kyuubi without exploding. I was the only one in the village he could use. Lucky me, I guess. He died sealing it into me, and the Sandaime found me a few minutes later. You know the rest. Ahsoka just shook her head. I don't even know. So, back on Rago, that was the Kyuubi? Sort of. Naruto looked away. He didn't want to see her face when he told her this part. When that Mandalorian killed Vair, I sort of lost it. I tried to use the Kyuubi's power, but I couldn't control it. That chakra had so much anger and hatred in it, it overwhelmed me. Pain and rage and, I guess, animal instinct took over, and the fox tried to get me to set him free. I almost did it, too. If it hadn't been for you. Me? What do you mean? I heard your voice. Even inside my head, I heard you. It gave me something to focus on besides the pain. You gave me the strength to take control back and shove the Kyuubi's chakra back into the seal. He growled and slammed his hand into the wall, denting it. I was too late, though. I should have been faster. I'm so sorry, Ahsoka. What are you sorry for? Confusion laced her voice, and he turned to look at her, a little incredulous. How did she not understand? Ahsoka, I hurt you, he said, gesturing to her stomach. I could have killed you. You just said that was the Kyuubi, Naruto. It wasn't you. It might as well have been, he growled. For some reason, the fact that she wasn't angry bothered him. He'd screwed up, Criffing stabbed her, and she was barely even upset. How was she not yelling at him? I never should have used that power. Even when I did, I should have gotten it under control faster. Then you wouldn't have gotten hurt. She tilted her head and gave him a look he couldn't quite identify for a moment, but said nothing. Finally, just before he broke the silence himself, Ahsoka rolled her eyes and smacked him in the chest. Between her injuries and the awkward angle, the blow didn't have much power behind it, but she landed it right on one of the still sensitive patches of skin. He winced at the sudden sting, but her sudden glare cut off his automatic protest. You criff carking smack space brain smack nerf hurting smack idiot. She advanced steadily, pummeling the same sore spot on his chest with every insult. Naruto wasn't sure whether to stop her, try to talk to her, or run for cover, and wisely settled for doing nothing but biting back a hiss of pain every time her tiny but surprisingly effectual fist slammed into his torso. That wasn't you. This, she gestured to her bandaged stomach, was barely more than a scratch. If you hadn't gotten control back when you did, the Kyuubi, or whatever you want to call that thing, would have ripped me apart, and the others right after. You got that? Between the repeated blows to his, now very sore indeed, chest and the ferocity of her rant, it took Naruto a few moments to remember how to speak. He'd been on the receiving end of a few prize chewing-outs before, but something about the particular fire burning in Ahsoka's eyes, turning them into miniature blue suns, left him bereft of speech. Of course, once he did finally find his voice again, he promptly did something dumb with it. Namely, he tried to argue with her. But you got dash, was all he could say before Ahsoka growled at him. It wasn't some paltry human imitation either. No, she let out a proper predator's growl. The sort that went straight to the base of his brain and alerted survival instincts that had been ancient back when humans still thought walking on two legs was a pretty nifty idea. Naruto felt his bones vibrate and the hairs on the back of his neck made a sudden bid for freedom. Wisely, he shut up. Oh, for Criff's sake, look, Ahsoka said as she carefully unwound the bandages around her stomach. Naruto made a strangled noise in the back of his throat and moved to stop her, but rapidly thought better of it. Ahsoka had occasionally threatened to bite his fingers off when he interfered in something she was doing, and he didn't want to test if today was the day she actually proved that she could. Instead, he watched, transfixed, as she slowly removed the bandages and then peeled off the Bacta dressing underneath them, revealing her bare stomach. A fresh star-shaped scar, a little over 10 centimeters wide, spread just to the left of her navel. The shiny pink tissue contrasted horribly with the orange skin around it. It horrified him to see it, but he couldn't look away. It stared him right in the face, the evidence of his failure, and why wasn't Ahsoka angry at him? Ahsoka, I'm so sore dash. Stop apologizing, Naruto, she said, and she grabbed his hand. It wasn't your fault, and it wasn't that serious. I'm fine, okay? Feel for yourself. She took his hand and pulled it over to rest on her stomach. It was warm and solid under his hand, and he could sense the force in her pulsing beneath his fingertips. She gasped a little at his touch, but didn't hesitate to drag his hand over to the fresh scar. To his surprise, it felt exactly as minor as she had claimed. For all that it looked awful, he could barely feel a difference between her skin and the scar tissue. From how little the scar raised above the surrounding area, he could tell the initial wound hadn't been very deep, more of a surface burn than anything else. He rested his hand against her stomach for another second, just to reassure himself that she really was there, alive and well, before he pulled back. "See?" she asked. Her eyes had lost their previous fire, and now they seemed to plead with him to understand what she was saying. "I'm fine. You didn't hurt me. You saved my life. We'd all have died if it wasn't for you. Thank you, Naruto." She stared at him for a second, an unreadable look on her face. He wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he certainly wasn't expecting what happened next. She leaned over to him, as if to whisper something in his ear, he thought. Instead of that, though, he felt something warm and very soft press against his cheek for a second. When she pulled back, her stripes had darkened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Holy! Did she just kiss me? His brain ground to a screeching halt at that thought. She did. Ahsoka just kissed me. Naruto couldn't have been more surprised if she'd sprouted wings and taken flight right before his eyes. In fact, given some of the weirder clan jutsu Jiraiya had told him about, he would have found that a good deal less shocking than Ahsoka actually kissing him. Even if it had just been on the cheek, she had kissed him. She had kissed him. He wasn't sure how to feel about that, really. It felt nice, some treacherous part of his brain supplied. He seized that thought and examined it suspiciously, before he had to conclude that the kiss had, indeed, felt nice. Better than nice, actually, he thought, his mind wandering back to the sensation of her lips against his cheek. Great. Soft and whoa. Nope. Not going there. No way. Naruto was not about to let himself think anything along those lines about Ahsoka. She was his best friend, and that was all. Nothing else. Really, that same treasonous part of his brain asked. Nothing else? Somewhat disturbingly, Naruto found he didn't have an answer to that. He tried to use the trusty teenager method of ignoring the problem in the hopes it went away, but it didn't work. Eventually, it occurred to him to solicit Ahsoka's input into why she had kissed him. It then occurred to him he'd been sitting silently for nearly a minute, with a, most likely, dumb look on his face, and that probably wasn't a good thing. Ahsoka? Shut up, Naruto. But you dash. Shut up, Naruto. Once again, Naruto wisely listened and shut his mouth. He could shut up. He had no problem not talking about what had just happened. As far as most of him, save for that traitorous little corner of his mind that kept reminding him how good the kiss had felt, was concerned, not addressing it was the best possible solution. Certainly, it was better than getting his fingers bitten off. He didn't know if that was still a possibility, but he wasn't interested in finding out. Whatever that kiss meant, if it had meant anything at all, it could wait. For now, he had a friend to comfort and draw comfort from. Instead, he leaned back against the pillows, closed his eyes, and tried to relax. After a moment, he felt Ahsoka's warm, somewhat bony, but very comforting weight curl up beside him in her customary cuddle. She shifted around until she was comfortable, kneeing him twice in the process. Naruto just smiled a little and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her tight to his side and eliciting a contented sigh from her. Now, more than ever before, he empathized with her to-gritton desire for closeness and companionship. After the stress of the past few hours, just having his best friend, sharp elbows and all, pressed up next to him, was a comfort beyond words. It was a reassurance that he wasn't alone, that she was still there, and that she somehow still accepted him, even after everything she had seen. The silence stretched between them, golden and comfortable, for several minutes. To others it may have seemed awkward, the two of them just lying in the same bed together, saying nothing. As far as Naruto was concerned, though, nothing else needed saying. He was perfectly content to just lie there and let the presence of his best friend dull the ache of Vair's death for a while. He didn't doze off, exactly, but he let any sense of time slip away as he drifted into a sort of meditative trance, buoyed by the dim feelings of friendship and acceptance he could sense from Ahsoka. Eventually, he felt her shift next to him, and her head left its former place on his shoulder. He didn't think much of it until he felt her fingers lightly trace over the marks on his cheek. Even then, the sensation was pleasant, if a little distracting, until heard her voice. So, Whiskers, huh? That's what you've been hiding under your mask? Wadash's hand flew up to his jaw and felt bare skin rather than the familiar cloth of his mask. Gah! Oh, and fangs, I guess. Ahsoka's smile could have been framed and displayed as a new galactic standard definition for the word impish. My best friend never even told me he has fangs. That's just hurtful, Naruto. How the hell did I not notice my mask was gone? He thought, looking around desperately to see if someone had left one nearby. Blaster bolts. She's never going to let this go. To his relief, he quickly spotted a familiar piece of dark blue cloth pinned under his lightsaber. He hadn't noticed it earlier, probably because he'd still been so disoriented. Ignoring Ahsoka's giggles, he lunged across the bed, snatched it up, and pulled it on. The smooth fabric felt comforting against his skin, a connection to his old home and a reminder of the faith Kakashi had placed in him. Naruto wondered what his former team leader might have said if he could see him now. He'd probably just sigh and give me a card or something, the lazy bastard, Naruto thought, the image bringing a brief smile to his lips before he sobered up. He trusted me to carry his lessons with me into the world. Did I fail him, too? Before he could mull too deeply on his thoughts, Ahsoka grabbed his attention by poking him, repeatedly, in the side of his head. I can't believe that's what you've been hiding under there all these years. Yeah, well, believe it. And don't go telling people, okay? It's fun, having everyone try to guess what I look like. Ahsoka snorted. Are you kidding me? After all those times I tried to get a peek under there? Hell, Vire, and I dash. She broke off suddenly, the laughter fading from her eyes. Naruto swallowed heavily against the sudden lump in his throat and had to look away for a moment as his vision misted. When he looked back, he saw Ahsoka rubbing her eyes, the back of her hand clearly wet. She took in a hiccuping breath and her whole posture seemed to draw in on itself, like a leaf curling under the sun. He thought he heard her whisper something, but it was so soft even his enhanced hearing couldn't make it out. Sokka? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The last thing she needed was for him to break down like he had earlier. She's just really gone, isn't she? I mean, I saw her after everything, but it just hit me now. She's really gone. Her shoulders shook, and to his surprise, Naruto felt an overwhelming sense of guilt coming from her, even with his muted empathy. I tried to fight Aura, she sobbed, I promise I did. I tried so hard, but she beat me. Naruto, I'm so sorry. It's my fault. I should have been better. I should have. Hey, that's not true, he said, pulling her into a hug. Her smaller form shuddered against his, even as she plainly tried to muffle her sobs. It's not your fault. You did everything you could. I dash. Naruto stopped. He had been about to say I'm sorry, and tell her how it had been his fault that Vire died, until the rest of what he'd just said caught up to him. She did everything she could. That's exactly what Jiraiya and Mei said to me. He touched his mask. And it's exactly what Kakashi-sensei would have told me, too. Stars, I wish it was so easy to believe them. For the first time since he had woken up, Naruto actively thought back to the events leading up to Vire's death. It hurt, bitterly, but he forced himself to do it, anyway. Over and over, he replayed the events in his mind, and over, he couldn't see another way. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't see anything he could have changed or done better to prevent his sister's murder. If I'm not going to blame Ahsoka for Vire's death, I can't blame myself, either. It's too late to change anything now. I just have to find some way of coming to terms with that. That wasn't to say it hurt any less. Nothing had changed. Vire was still dead. He had still broken his promise and used the Kyuubi's power. Even if Ahsoka had forgiven him for that, he was still nowhere near forgiving himself. He honestly didn't know if he could still call himself a Jedi. All of those issues still tore at him, but they were problems for the future. The near future, perhaps, but certainly the future. Now, what concerned him was doing what he could to comfort his best friend, who was crying in his arms. It bothered him on some deep and undefinable level to see Ahsoka so distraught. She was normally such a font of energy, passion, and strength that seeing her weep was hard to wrap his mind around. So, with an ease born from experience, he pushed his own pain aside and focused on helping someone else. It's not your fault, he repeated. It's not anyone's fault but Aura and the one who killed her. Do you understand me? She pulled back and looked up at him, leaving a large wet patch on the front of his shirt. Her face, if he was being honest, was a mess. She was blotchy, her eyes were rimmed red and bloodshot, and a bit of snot dribbled from her nose. Her stripes had faded to a dull slate color, and tear tracks marred her cheeks. Nevertheless, she sniffled once, wiped the tears from her eyes, and nodded at him. I tried to blame myself earlier, Naruto said. He didn't know exactly where he was going with his thoughts, but the words came in a flood, and he felt powerless to stop them. I still want to tell myself it was all my fault, that if only I'd been faster, if only I was better, maybe none of this would have happened. Ahsoka's eyes widened, and she shook her head. She might have said something, but Naruto was already on a roll, and he didn't dare stop. He didn't think he would have the emotional strength to start again if he stopped talking now. I want you to promise me you won't blame yourself for Vair's death. You do that, and I'll promise to do the same, okay? I'm not going to roll over and let Aura and that monster she hired beat me, and I'm not going to let you do that, either. Deal? Once again, Ahsoka nodded. Deal, she said in a watery voice. It still hurts, though. Naruto pulled her back into a hug, one she eagerly returned. I know. I'm here for you, though. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. No matter how many times you try to stab me with your bony elbows. Ahsoka snorted against him, the sound halfway between a cough and a hiccup. It wasn't quite a laugh, not really, but it was close enough for the moment. He smiled to hear it, and smiled even more when she pointedly drove one said bony elbow directly into his stomach. Neither of them said anything more, instead allowing a comforting silence to fall over the room. Slowly, Naruto heard Ahsoka's breathing ease and slow from her earlier shuddering sobs into the gentle respiration of sleep. Before he even realized he was nodding off, he joined her in dreamland. Chapter 34. Mace left the council meeting weary, but relieved. Weary because, as expected, the more conservative masters had indeed raised a fuss. Oppo Rancisis, by far the most conservative member of the High Council, had even advocated confining Naruto to isolated meditation in the temple indefinitely and confiscating his lightsaber. Yariel Poof had squashed the idea immediately, and criticized the Thespasian for his apparent callousness, but even that had not fully quieted the other traditionalists. Cici Tyan and Eth Koth had both suggested similar, if less extreme, measures. He suspected Adi Gallia and even Peel had also been leaning in that direction, though they had at least kept their opinions quiet. The debate had been going nowhere until he brought up Master Faye's suggestion. As she predicted, it had mollified the traditionalists and satisfied everyone else. After that was out of the way, there had been the matter of how to respond to the attack. Aura Singh had been a problem for the Jedi for decades now, but she had never pulled something on this scale. From Naruto's report, her attack hadn't been a random act of violence. Someone had hired her to ambush the gathering, and to kill him in particular. The Jedi needed to find out who, and why, but, with the separatist movement growing ever stronger, the order had stretched itself thin. Most of their experienced knights and masters were already busy, and those that weren't had little or no skill in investigation. In the end, Yoda had suggested they send Jiraiya to hunt down the elusive assassin. It had been a controversial suggestion, to be sure, but a difficult one to argue with. Jiraiya certainly had the right skill set, and his experience as a warrior was unquestionable. He also had a network of contacts and informants spread across the galaxy, including many in low places. While he remained a controversial figure with the traditionalists, other options had not been forthcoming. As a nod to their concerns, though, and because, even injured and running, Aura Singh was dangerous prey, Yoda had agreed to have Master Undulai accompany his Padawan on his investigation. Neither Jiraiya nor Luminary would be pleased to be going on a mission while Naruto and Barris were injured, but duty came first. Meanwhile, his mind was on how to tell Naruto about the council's decision. Though their bond was weaker than usual, a temporary side effect of the Kyuubi's chakra, he could sense enough to tell his Padawan was asleep. Loath to wake him when he was recovering, Mace just poked his head in to make sure everything was well. To his surprise, he found Naruto and Ahsoka asleep in the same bed, the Togruta girl clinging tightly to Naruto while he wrapped her in a protective embrace. The tear tracks on Ahsoka's face and the stain on the front of Naruto's shirt told him they were likely sleeping off an emotional conversation. Both looked peaceful, and the Force hummed with warmth and affection. Some part of him, the part that still clung to the letter of the Jedi Code, the part that still disdained Naruto's passionate emotions, balked at the blatant display of attachment before him. Another part of him, one that had watched Naruto defy Jedi convention for the last 2 years, noticed how the Force shone around the two of them. Their bond of friendship, if such a word was even adequate to describe what he saw between them, glowed in the Force, beating back the grim pall the events of Rago had cast upon them both. That didn't mean he approved of the two of them sleeping in such a position, but that was more because Ahsoka, at least, had obviously disobeyed her healer's orders to stay in bed. Mace shook his head and sat down. To think I once would have condemned this as dangerous and a path to the dark side. It seems the Jedi need to rethink our definition of attachment, if this is the strength it can give. While he waited for Naruto to wake up, Mace meditated on the code. It had been the guiding principle in his life since before he could walk, seeing its flaws, or at least admitting now what he had seen for several years, wasn't easy. It had shaped him as a Jedi, and yet, his idea of what a Jedi should and could be had changed. Perhaps it was time the code changed to reflect that. He knew Yariel had had similar thoughts, and Yaddle had outright said the code needed updating several times. Of late, he found himself agreeing with them. He didn't have long to think on it. Even when mentally exhausted and recovering from severe injuries, Naruto was still a trained warrior. Before long, he stirred, no doubt having noticed a third presence in the room. Mace knew it was only because Naruto subconsciously recognized it as him that the boy hadn't snapped awake the moment he opened the door. His movement woke Ahsoka, too, who groaned at the sudden return to consciousness. Naruto glanced around the room, his eyes searching for whatever had woken him up. When his gaze landed on Mace, he stiffened in shock. Ahsoka's reaction when she noticed him was even more extreme. She yelped in surprise and tried to leap out of the bed. The sudden movement must have aggravated her injuries, because she clutched her abdomen and grimaced in pain, nearly losing her balance. Before she could fall, though, Naruto's arm snapped out and gently pulled her back up, taking care not to jostle her injuries. He performed the whole action automatically, seemingly unaware he was even doing it. "Master. I didn't expect you." Clearly, Mace deadpanned, before raising an eyebrow at Ahsoka. "I assume there is a good reason you ignored your healer's advice, youngling?" "We were just She babbled for a moment before regaining her composure. "I didn't want to be alone, Master. We were talking and just fell asleep." He had suspected as much and nodded. "Very well. Be sure to mind instructions from your seniors more carefully in the future, though, particularly healers. Now, I need to speak to my Padawan. The council has come to a decision." Just like that, the warm, comforting atmosphere of the room wilted. Tension crept across Naruto's face and shoulders, and his eyes dimmed, as if a door had swung shut behind them. It wasn't as bad as he had been when he'd first woken up, but clearly the reminder that the council had met, and why, had disrupted whatever fragile peace he had found. Through their bond, Mace sensed a flicker of fear. He didn't let it show on his face, but Naruto was nervous about what the council had decided. "She can stay. It's fine. I already told her about the QB. I'm done keeping secrets from my friends." Mace frowned at his flat tone, but nodded. If Naruto wanted to let Ahsoka listen to their conversation, he wasn't about to gainsay him. He didn't want Naruto to feel as though he were alone in this, after all. Also, it wasn't as though they could keep the QB a secret from the other initiates anymore, and not even Master Rancisis could deny it was Naruto's secret to keep or tell. His Padawan had always been very clear about that. "The first thing you should know is you are not being punished. You made a mistake using the QB's power, especially in anger, but the council recognizes there were mitigating circumstances." Some of the tension left Naruto's shoulders at that, though his hands clenched into fists. Clearly, despite Yoda's earlier words, he had been expecting some sort of repercussion for his actions. "So, what, then?" he asked. "I mean, I used the dark side. The council isn't just gonna ignore that. You brushed the dark side, but no, we are not ignoring it. Once Master Fate clears you to travel, you and I will go to an ancient Jedi temple on Lothal. Naruto cocked his head. What's in there? If the Force wills it, wisdom for the both of us. Jedi who brushes up against the dark side have often gone there, seeking renewed balance. The trial within will be difficult and dangerous, but I believe you will succeed and emerge stronger than before. Naruto seemed to turn the news over in his head for a while. Ahsoka glanced between the two of them, but said nothing. Eventually, Naruto nodded and forced an eye smile. It was clearly fake, but Mace took the effort as an encouraging sign. Sounds good, Master. Very well. Focus on healing, for now, Mace said. Both of you should also know, Vair's funeral is tomorrow. If you feel up to it, you are welcome to attend. Naruto tried to respond, but no sound came out. After a moment, Ahsoka tapped him on the elbow to get his attention. Something unspoken passed between them before she looked back at Mace. We'll be there, Master Windu. Naruto nodded. As you wish, Mace said. Now, however, you should get some rest. In your own beds, this time. Understood? Reluctantly, they nodded, and he carried Ahsoka back across the room to her own bed. While he wasn't going to give them a lecture on attachment, and he trusted Naruto to maintain propriety, the fact remained that sleeping in their own beds would be better for their healing. However, mindful of their close bond, Mace wheeled Ahsoka's bed over next to Naruto's, so they could at least take comfort in each other's proximity. It seemed to work, as they were both asleep again within minutes. True to Mace's prediction, Luminara was not happy about going to track down Aura Singh. While someone had to bring that madwoman to justice, she was loath to leave Barriss in her current state. Though she was not yet her Padawan, Luminara already cared deeply for the girl, and it pained her to see her so badly injured. 3 years ago, she would never have dreamed of allowing herself to feel such an attachment to another being, even her future Padawan. Now, though, she had seen just how strong such attachments could make someone. The worry and grief at seeing someone she cared for injured was unpleasant, yes, but it was also part of being alive. Nevertheless, she had a duty to fulfill, and a Jedi always put duty over their own desires. Jiraiya's presence on the mission was a balm to her discontent, at least. In the 3 years she had known him, the former shinobi had become her closest friend and confidant. He'd shown her, both by argument and example, how to accept and even embrace her emotions. For that alone, she would always be grateful to him. The thought of spending time with him, even on a mission like this, sparked something warm in her chest she couldn't name. She wasn't sure what she felt for him, but friendship didn't quite describe it. What she did know was that being around him made her happy, even as it also had her often gritting her teeth in frustration at his antics. Barriss was in a room with Trilla, who was off being treated at the moment, and looked to be meditating when Luminara walked in. Her leg was wrapped in a thick cast, with a status panel on the side giving a readout on the bone weld underneath. Despite her calm appearance, Luminara could feel Barriss hurt, and see it in her slightly hunched posture and not quite steady breathing. Barriss? She asked, careful to keep her voice soft. May I speak with you? Barriss gasped and looked up, surprised by her voice. She had been deeper in meditation than Luminara thought. Oh, Master Unduli. I'm sorry for not noticing you earlier. That's fine. How are you feeling? For a moment, Luminara thought Barriss had not heard her. She seemed distracted by something, her attention elsewhere. It took a few seconds longer for her to answer. I don't know. It doesn't seem real. I can't believe Vair is. Her voice trailed off into a silent sob before she took a shaky breath. She wouldn't meet Luminara's eyes. I apologize, Master. I know Jedi aren't supposed to develop attachments. My control should be better than this. Luminara moved closer and rubbed soothing circles on Barriss' back. She tensed at the sudden contact, but made no move to reject it. Slowly, as if wary of a trap, Barriss leaned back into her hand. Luminara just sat and silently offered what comfort she could until she decided on what to say. While Barriss was correct about standard Jedi doctrine, that wasn't what Luminara believed in anymore. She wanted her soon-to-be Padawan to know she wouldn't reprimand her for having emotions. Barriss, it is okay to feel sorrow at the loss of a friend. That doesn't make you a poor Jedi. It means you care. That is a good thing, do you understand? It is okay to mourn. Barris bit her lip and squeezed her eyes shut. Her hands fisted in the blankets. Master Yoda always said we shouldn't miss the dead. That they've rejoined the living force. For all his wisdom, Master Yoda is nearly 1,000 years old, Luminara sighed. He experiences loss differently, and I think he forgets that at times. Yes, the dead have returned to the living force, and we should take comfort in that, but their loss still hurts. Accepting Vair's death doesn't mean feeling nothing. She was your friend. Honor that by grieving for her. Barris finally looked up at her, her eyes wide and shiny. Those eyes, already far too old for a girl her age, Luminara realized, searched her face for something. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found it, because the next thing Luminara knew, her arms were full of crying Muriel teenager. Great, racking sobs shook Barris' body, and Luminara had to move quickly to position her so she wouldn't strain her injured leg. It was so. I fought and now. Her words melted into incoherence, and eventually she gave up talking altogether. Luminara stroked her head as she cried. She didn't know what else to do. She had only begun accepting her emotions a few years ago, and wasn't sure how to comfort a crying child beyond just being there for her. What words could I even say to help her? Luminara hated how helpless she felt. Anything I say would feel inadequate. Eventually, Barris ran out of tears. Her sobs turned to gasps, and then sniffles. Finally, they petered out altogether. She stayed in Luminara's arms for a few minutes longer, her shoulders still trembling, but bit by bit, she pulled herself back under control. When she pulled back, her eyes were dry, though swollen from crying. Luminara reached out and gently straightened her headscarf, and wiped the salt off her cheeks with her thumbs. Once again, Barris stilled at the touch, before letting herself relax into it. Thank you, Master. Barris' voice was hoarse from crying, and Luminara passed her a glass of water from her bedside table. She gulped it down before continuing. I knew there was evil in the galaxy, but how could anyone be so vile? Vair was innocent. How can people do such things? She seemed to be speaking mostly to herself, but Luminara answered anyway. People like that are why the Jedi exist. It's our job to protect the galaxy from such violence and evil. It's what the Force calls us to do. I don't know if I can fight, Barris said, and hung her head. Luminara could feel the shame burning in her heart. I want to be a Jedi, but I can't stand hurting people. Even evil people. I'm not a warrior. You don't have to fight in order to help people. You told me before, you want to be a healer. That is a noble calling for any Jedi. I think you will help a great many people like that. Luminara tilted Barris' head up to look her in the eyes. Follow your heart, Barris, and you will find your path. I'm confident of that. Barris didn't say anything, but she seemed to accept what Luminara had said. Certainly, the shame she had sensed earlier was gone. She gave the girl a few more minutes to process things and clean herself up before she mentioned her upcoming mission. Barris took it with equanimity, though Luminara noticed some of her earlier tension return. No doubt she was nervous about her pursuing someone as dangerous as Aurra Singh. Please be careful, Master, she said, confirming Luminara's suspicions. That assassin is a madwoman. I felt it. I will do my duty, Barris, but don't worry. I'm not going alone. Jiraiya is coming with me. Between the two of us, I'm sure we will handle anything that comes our way. I promise I'll be back as soon as I can, she said. When I return, I will formally take you as my Padawan. Barris relaxed again when she heard Jiraiya would accompany Luminara on her mission. I look forward to that, Master. She smiled at her, and Luminara smiled back. So do I, Padawan mine. Jiraiya wasn't any happier than Luminara to be leaving his godson while he was still processing what had happened, but he understood Yoda's reasoning. He did have better underworld contacts than just about any other Jedi, and tracking an elusive target in hostile territory was more or less half of what he'd done as a shinobi. Quinlan was likely the only Jedi more skilled than him in that area, and he was busy doing whatever it was Jedi Shadows did most of the time. Probably gathering intel on the rising separatist faction. He also trusted Mace to look after Naruto. For all his reserve and grim stoicism, he knew Mace cared deeply for Naruto. He would do right by him, no matter what. None of that changed his reluctance to leave, though. Only the fact that he knew Yoda hated having to give him the assignment kept him from raising his voice. Leadership demanded difficult and, at times, callous decisions. That was one reason Jiraiya had refused to become Hokage. He'd seen what it had done to Hiruzen, and later Minato, and he wanted no part of it for himself. Fortunately, Naruto took the news well. He was eager to see the people responsible for murdering his sister brought to justice, and had said so most enthusiastically. Jiraiya suspected that, were it not for his and, more importantly, Ahsoka's injuries, Naruto would have demanded a spot on the mission himself. There was a cold fire in his eyes when he mentioned Aurra Sing and the Mandalorians, one Jiraiya did not at all like the look of. Such icy rage was out of place in his godson. Just as well he doesn't come. He's in a dark enough place as it is. The last thing he needs is the temptation for revenge thrown on top of that. Naruto has always been impulsive, more inclined to go with his gut than wait and analyze a situation. He'd improved tremendously over the years, but Jiraiya wouldn't vouch for his godson's self-control if he were to confront Aurra again so soon. He would be hard-pressed himself to keep from crushing the vile assassin like a bug when he found her. Vair had practically been family, and an innocent child beyond that. For a moment, Jiraiya missed the barbaric methods of the shinobi world. If anyone deserved to spend some quality time strapped to a table in Tianai while Ibiki and Anko had their jollies, it was Aurra Sing. His black mood stayed with him until he reached the local hangar, where he sought his partner for the upcoming mission. He couldn't help but smile a little at the sight of her. If there's one silver lining to this whole nightmare, it's that I get to spend some time with Luminara. Not very romantic circumstances, but at least I'll have good company and a partner I know I can trust. Luminara returned his smile when she saw him, and the sight brushed away the last of his malaise like cobwebs. Though he had yet to tell her of his feelings, over the last 2 years, Jiraiya and Luminara's friendship had deepened into a close bond of trust and camaraderie. He could safely say that, aside from Naruto and Yoda, there was no one in the order he trusted more to have his back. "How did it go with Barris?" he asked. "As well as I could expect. She's traumatized, but I got her to start grieving, at least." "How's Naruto?" "About the same. I hope this training trip Mace has planned will help him." He frowned when he remembered the dangerous look in Naruto's eyes. "He's furious right now, at himself most of all." She put a reassuring hand on his elbow, a rare gesture of physical intimacy from her. "He will get through this, Jiraiya. Naruto's strong, and he's had some outstanding teachers. I believe in him." "Thank you, Luminara." He placed his hand over hers and squeezed it gently for a second before letting go. "Now, let's go deliberately look for a dangerous, half-crazed, Jedi-hating assassin. There's only, 10 billion or so planets she could be on. Should be easy enough for 2 dashing adventurers like us." Luminara rolled her eyes, which only made him grin wider. "I see you plan on treating this mission with your customary professionalism, then?" The sarcasm in her voice could have etched metal, and she set off towards their shuttle. He followed after her, still smiling. "You know me, professional to the bone. Not a drop of humor in me." "That is most assuredly true." "You are not at all funny." He gasped and placed a hand over his heart and gasped in mock outrage. Luminara remained spectacularly unmoved by his display, so he pouted at her instead. That, finally, broke through her facade, and she gave a quiet chuckle, one which grew into a full-grown laugh when he silently cheered and patted himself on the back. When they reached the ship's boarding ramp, she stopped and looked up at him, a strange, tender expression on her normally serene face. "Thank you for that, Jiraiya. It has been a trying day." Laughing felt wonderful. "I appreciate it, even if you insist on acting the fool. It makes days like this far easier to bear." Jiraiya let his goofy grin drop, and gave her a much smaller, but far more sincere smile instead. He reached out and brushed back a strand of hair that had escaped her headdress. She inhaled softly at his touch, but made no move to avoid it. "Acting like a buffoon is worth it if it means I get to see you laugh more often," he said. Luminara's eyes widened, but she said nothing. "Now, let's get going." We have a mystery to solve. He walked up the ramp into the shuttle. She stayed put, frozen for a moment with her eyes wide, before whatever spell had held her broke and she followed him on board. The next day, everyone gathered for Vair's funeral. Naruto, Ahsoka, Barriss, Trilla, Nox, and Guldos were all there, though Guldos and Barriss were both in hoverchairs to avoid straining themselves. Ahsoka, much to her displeasure, was on crutches. She had protested that she didn't need them, but Bant had been unyielding. She could either use the crutches or join her two friends in a hoverchair. Reluctantly, she agreed, though Naruto was sure he would end up standing in for those crutches at some point during the day. They held the funeral in a stone amphitheater carved into a hill outside the city. It had a beautiful view of the endless, rolling prairies that covered most of Anshan's landmass, while the slope of the hill sheltered it from the constant wind. It was apparently a sacred site for one of the Elwari tribes, the nomadic locals who roamed the plains. Naruto didn't really know or care. It could have been the birthplace of the Rikudo Sennin himself for all it mattered to him. It was where he would say farewell to his sister. Nothing about it could be more significant than that. Vair's body was laid out on a wooden pyre in the center of the amphitheater, covered in a white sheet. She looked unbearably small, lying there, and Naruto had to fight down a sudden wave of nausea. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, knowing her body was there and yet she wasn't. He should have been sensing her, hearing her quiet voice and watching her try not to fidget, but he wasn't because she wasn't there. The weight of her death hit him again and stopped him dead in his tracks. His legs wouldn't move, no matter how hard he tried. It suddenly became difficult to breathe, and a strange buzzing filled his ears. Naruto couldn't take his eyes off the pyre and the shrouded body that lay upon it. The rest of his surroundings felt as if they were falling away from him. Just when he thought everything would fade completely, leaving him all alone with his sister's body, he felt a small, warm hand slip into his own. When he looked, he saw slender orange fingers wrapped around his larger ones. Naruto? She didn't ask if he was alright, or what was wrong, or why he had stopped. She didn't need to. Ahsoka put all those questions and more into just his name. He could hear her concern, her curiosity, and her sympathy all in just those 3 syllables. He gave her hand a squeeze, and all at once, the world rushed back. His legs moved, he could breathe, and he kept on walking, still holding her hand. "Thanks," he said, and that was it. He didn't need to say anything else. Ahsoka understood, he could tell, and Naruto loved her a little for that. Neither of them let go of the other's hand for the rest of the ceremony. He had never been so grateful for another person's touch as he was right then. Mace walked over and stood behind them, his presence a reassuring bulwark of strength and composure. He didn't say anything, but Naruto could feel him reaching out through the bond, offering whatever comfort he could. When everyone had arrived, Yoda stepped forward and raised one gnarled hand. His presence thrummed through the force, and several more bundles of wood floated up and laid on top of Vair's body, covering it and completing the pyre. "One with the force, Vair's spirit has become," he said. His voice sounded far older and more tired than Naruto had ever heard it. "Now, farewell we say." As one, every Jedi present lifted a hand and concentrated on the force. Yoda linked with the initiates, guiding them through what to do. Mace had taught Naruto the technique over a year ago. At the time, he had never thought he would use it like this. The force hummed with power, and, with a sharp pop, Vair's pyre burst into flames. Naruto bowed his head, and Ahsoka's grip on his hand turned almost painful. He welcomed it, though. It felt as if, were she to let go, he'd drop back into the frigid waters of grief that had consumed him earlier. The pyre burned hot and bright, and for a long while the only sounds in the amphitheater were the crackle of sparks and the ever-present howl of the wind. Though he stared at the pyre the whole time, after a while, Naruto stopped seeing the flames. Instead, he let his mind drift into the force. Memories of Vair, of her eagerness to learn Nihongo, her smile when she first molded chakra, him teaching her how to throw a kunai and set a trap, all floated before him. For a single moment, he thought he felt the starbright candle flame of her presence, but then it was gone. Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and looked at the pyre again, now burning down to coals. "Goodbye, Yamato." After the funeral, Naruto spent some time talking with the other Clawmouse initiates. They all reassured him they didn't blame him for any of what had happened. Hearing their support eased some of the ache in his heart, and he spent a comfortable half-hour just being with them. Eventually, though, Nox asked the inevitable question. Naruto, what happened to you after Vair died? You turned into something else. Naruto sighed. Well, I suppose if I told the story once, I can do it again, he thought. They deserve to know. Telling the story of how his father sealed the Kyuubi inside him was easier the second time. Just like Ahsoka, the others looked shocked and horrified. When he told them about his life in the village, and how the adults had ostracized him, he thought Barris would actually curse. He'd never seen her so angry. That is just evil, treating a child like that, she growled. To compound his surprise, she moved her hover chair over to him and grabbed his hand. I promise, none of us are going to abandon you because of that thing. All the others sounded their agreement, and Naruto properly grinned beneath his mask for the first time since the attack. Love for his friends, fierce and protective, kindled in his chest, stoked by the sincerity he sensed from all of them. He had never gotten the chance to tell his friends back in Konoha about the Kyuubi, but in his brightest dreams they reacted like this. For a few moments, the universe seemed right again. Then Guldos spoke up, his gravelly voice breaking the spell. There is one thing I don't understand. If the Kyuubi is sealed inside of you so well, how did it come out back on Rago? Naruto bit his lip as the happy feeling faded away. There was no malice or judgment behind Guldos' question, just genuine curiosity. Nevertheless, the thought of explaining how he'd willingly given in to the beast made his stomach clench. The words froze in his throat. He took a deep breath and tried again. That was my fault. I made a mistake. If telling the story of his birth and childhood had grown easier the second time, talking about his failure on Rago had become twice as hard. Vair's death may not have been his fault, but using the Kyuubi's power definitely had been. He ground his teeth as he told them how it had hurt Ahsoka, and had tried to kill them all. Anger burned in his gut, a fierce rage at the beast that had dared hurt his friends. In the dark recesses of his mind, he heard a deep growl, but he ignored it. That monster wasn't worth his time. Eventually, he finished recounting his struggle against the fox. Again, none of them blamed him, and again it warmed his heart that his friends believed in him so much, but he excused himself shortly thereafter. Between Vair's funeral and telling his friends about the Kyuubi, he felt emotionally run out, and there was still one thing he needed to do. 20 minutes later, Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor of his hospital room, meditating with his lightsaber floating at eye level in front of him. At his side lay the tools he would need to add another engraving to his hilt. As he sat there, immersed in the Force, the door hissed open and Ahsoka hobbled in on her crutches. He opened his eyes and blinked at the sudden intrusion, and his lightsaber dropped into his lap. Sorry, I didn't know you were meditating, Ahsoka said. I can come back later, if you want. Naruto shook his head. No, that's fine. I was done, anyway. She eyed him curiously. What were you meditating about? I didn't think you had the patience for sitting still and all that. He used the Force to grab a pillow from his bed and toss it at her face. It bounced off her montrals with a muffled whumph, eliciting a startled squawk from his snarky best friend. I've got plenty of patience, he sniffed, before growing serious again. I'm adding another carving to my lightsaber hilt, and I always meditate before I do that. Why? Ahsoka scooted the pillow he had used as artillery over next to him and tossed her crutches aside to sit on it. She seemed to have sensed how serious he was about the situation, because her teasing smile was gone, and her voice was genuinely curious. Naruto took a moment to choose his words carefully before he answered. It wasn't an easy thing to explain, but he wanted Ahsoka to understand why he chose the carvings he did, because they're not just mementos or souvenirs. They're more important than that. He held his lightsaber out to Ahsoka, and she took it and examined the carvings that spiraled down the hilt. My lightsaber is my life. It's the tool I use to protect people. It's also the weapon I use to hurt people. Sometimes even kill people. That's a lot of power, and the carvings help me make sure I use it properly. How? Ahsoka breathed, still transfixed by the images engraved into the copper hilt. Naruto took her hand in his and guided her fingers over the carvings. She shivered at the sudden contact, but said nothing. Each one represents a part of my life, something that helped make me into who I am. Whenever I see them, when I feel them under my hands, it reminds me I have to be true to who I am when I use my blade. When I protect someone, I'm protecting them with my whole being. When I strike someone down, it's not just some weapon or random Jedi killing them. It's me, and it has to be the right thing to do, or I'm betraying myself. That's why I always meditate before I add a new carving. I want this to represent the best of who I am, so I know what standard to hold myself to. Ahsoka looked up at him, a hint of surprise on her face. Wow. I never really thought of a lightsaber like that. It's kinda intimidating when you put it that way. She took one last look at his lightsaber before she handed it back to him. So, did you decide what you're gonna add? Yeah, I did. Wanna watch? She nodded and scooted closer to him to get a better view. Naruto grabbed his tools and used the force to hold the lightsaber steady. Slowly, with far more care and delicacy than most would have expected from him, he etched a new design into the hilt. The force guided his hand, granting him greater precision than any normal human could possess. Ahsoka sat next to him, silent and still, a hint of awe tinging her presence as she watched him work. Naruto blocked her out, though. All of his focus rested on his lightsaber and the tool he held. Though the carving was relatively small, only about 3 centimeters square, it took him the better part of 30 minutes to finish etching it into the copper duranium alloy of his lightsaber hilt. Only when he was satisfied that every detail was as close to perfect as he could make it, did Naruto finally shut off the plasma engraver and let his lightsaber fall into his hand. He blew on the new carving to cool it and then traced a finger over its contours. The still warm etching was the Nihongo symbol for Vair's name, followed by the symbol for sister. Can I see? Ahsoka asked. Wordlessly, he offered her the hilt to examine. She looked at the new engraving for a moment and then back at him, puzzled. That's it? Why just that? Because that's what's important. He took the lightsaber back and clipped it to his belt. I don't want to let Aura or the Mandos or the QB define me. Like I told you, this is supposed to be the best of me. I want my memories of Vair to be what I carry, not all this anger. I don't know if that'll happen, but at least I can try, right? That actually sounded wise. She sounded surprised. A little too surprised, actually. Naruto shot Ahsoka a glare. Hey, I can be plenty wise. I'm full of wisdom. I've got wisdom coming out my ears. You're full of something, all right. She rolled her eyes and gave him a playful shove. He gave her one right back, mindful not to jostle her too much. You'll get it when you have your own lightsaber, he said. Speaking of which, I can't wait to see what you build when I get back from Lothal. I'm sorry I won't be there. I was really looking forward to watching you guys build your lightsabers. What are you talking about? You're still gonna be there. Naruto cocked his head, not sure what she was talking about. She giggled, which only confused him further. You didn't think you would get out of being our guide for the gathering that easily, did you? What are you dash? After you left earlier, we all agreed. We're not going through the gathering unless you're there with us. She poked him in the chest, a mischievous glint in her eye. After all, it was your mission to guide us, and it's still not complete. We'll stage a mutiny if we have to. Naruto's jaw hung open beneath his mask. He didn't know what to say. Sure, none of the others had blamed him for what had happened on Rago, but this was different. They weren't just being supportive, they actually wanted him there. Not just wanted, they were demanding him over any other guide the council might assign. He tried to talk, but his throat felt constricted. He hadn't known happiness could actually choke you. You guys are awesome, he finally choked out. Ahsoka's grin threatened to split her face in half as she laid her head on his shoulder. I know, she said. You're pretty awesome, too. When she said it like that, Naruto could actually believe it. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Much to Ahsoka's envy, Naruto's physical wounds had all completely healed by the night after Vair's funeral. The chakra contamination was rather more stubborn, though. Even with multiple sessions with Master Fei every day, it still took until the morning of the 3rd day after the funeral for the last excess traces of the Kyuubi's chakra to leave his system. The seal still released tiny amounts of chakra constantly, but they were too small and too quickly absorbed into his body to interfere with his connection to the Force. Faye estimated that, without her helping purge the toxic chakra, it would have taken at least 2 weeks for his connection to the Force to return to normal. Finally, though, she declared him fit for travel, and Mace informed him they would be leaving that same afternoon. Naruto had mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, he was eager to get out of the hospital he'd been trapped in for the past 5 days. While he wasn't necessarily looking forward to whatever the Lothal Temple held for him, if it could offer wisdom, then he was all for it. Guilt and anger still plagued him, gnawing at his mind like rats. If whatever trial the temple offered could help him deal with that, then the sooner the better. On the other hand, he had gotten used to spending time with Ahsoka again. In the years he had been Mace's Padawan, Naruto hadn't realized how much he missed spending his days with his best friend. Just being around her gave him a measure of peace from the doubts tormenting him. That wasn't even getting into the fact that she had freaking kissed him. Yes, it had been on the cheek, and yes, it had probably just been a friendly gesture, but still. She hadn't brought it up again, and he found the idea of asking her about it even more terrifying than the idea of stealing Anko's dango and eating it in front of her. Ahsoka was his best friend. Messing that up, even thinking about messing that up, was unacceptable. As much as he enjoyed the uninterrupted time with Ahsoka and his former clanmates, for all that it had come about because of tragedy, Mace had drilled the importance of duty into his bones, and that meant leaving for Lothal. Reluctantly, he said his goodbyes to his friends. Guldos, ever reticent, merely nodded and said he looked forward to continuing the gathering. Trilla and Nox both wished him well and told him to hurry back. Barriss, after a little grumbling, folded and gave him a hug. "Thank you for always being there for me," she said. "May the Force be with you. You're my friend, Barriss. I'll always be there for you." She shot him a fleeting smile, her equivalent of a full-on grin, before she let him go. Her face was flushed green, and he could feel her embarrassment. Even with the more relaxed approach to emotions the Order had been taking recently, she was still very reserved. Ahsoka waited until last to say goodbye. When it was her turn, she pulled him in close and pressed her forehead against his. "You come back, okay?" she whispered fiercely. "You had better come back, or I'm gonna come get you." Naruto swallowed and hesitated. He hated the idea of making a promise he might not be able to keep, and Mace had said the trial would be risky. In the end, though, there was no arguing with that look in her eyes. It was the sort of burning determination that could reshape the cosmos. "I will. I promise I'll be back." There was no turning away from it now. No matter what, he had to pass the upcoming test. Ahsoka pulled back and nodded, apparently satisfied. He gave her a quick eye smile before heading off towards the hangar. To his surprise, when he reached the hangar, Naruto did not see his master standing in front of a T6, nor even one of the roomier, if slower, Eta-class shuttles. Instead, he stood near the boarding ramp of a mid-size yacht. Naruto didn't recognize the design, but it was a thing of beauty, all sleek lines and curves. Just from looking at it, he could tell it was faster than any typical transport. It occurred to him that Anakin would give his left foot to play with this ship. "Whoa," he said, the yacht's beauty momentarily overriding his tenuous manners. "It's gorgeous." "Whose ship is this, Master?" Mace said nothing, but a familiar voice sounded from inside the ship. "She's mine, Padawan. This is the Dawn Wind." Master Faye walked down the ramp, much to Naruto's surprise. "I will accompany Master Windu and you on your trip to Lothal," she said in response to his unasked question. The mention of Lothal forcibly reminded him of just why this trip was necessary and doused his momentary enthusiasm. Nevertheless, Naruto put on his mask of happiness. He doubted it would fool either of the Jedi Masters, but it certainly beat acting all mopey. That was Sasuke's shtick. "Cool. Can I fly her?" he asked, his earnestness only partially fake. Faye let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. It might also have been a snort, but Naruto chose to think of it as a laugh. "Maybe on the trip back. For now, you had best prepare for what you'll face on Lothal." "And what exactly will I be facing?" "No one's told me anything." A hint of frustration colored his voice, despite his efforts to hide it. Mace cut in and sent a mild warning through the bond. "Whatever is pulling you off balance. Things you fear, or things you hate. Do not worry about it just yet, though. It is still in the future. For now, it is best if we depart. It is a long way to Lot Hal. If your friends are going to insist on you guiding them through the crucible, then we had better not keep them waiting. Only someone intimately familiar with Mace's particular brand of dry humor would have caught the wry amusement in his voice when he mentioned the Clawmouse initiates and their threatened mutiny. Fortunately, Naruto was such a person, and he shot his master a snarky eye smile. No, I guess not. Let's go. Chapter 35. Darth Sidious swept into his secure chamber like a blizzard from the mountains, full of barely controlled fury. Nothing had tested his control like the events of the past few days since the early days of his apprenticeship under Plagius. The moment the doors closed, ensconcing him in the safety of the shielded walls, he loosened the reins on his power. The dark side flooded the room, rattling the furnishings and sending trails of cold energy sparking off the walls. He allowed himself 10 glorious seconds to bask in his fury, letting it strengthen him and reveling in the heady rush of its power. It was a glorious reminder of his own supremacy, of the might he wielded. This was the true nature of the Force, not the mewling scraps the Jedi restricted themselves to. Those foolish pretenders could never dream of power such as this. Reluctantly, he clamped down on his passions and reasserted the cold self-control that had propelled him so far. It would not do to truly lose control, not now. Now he needed clarity and cunning. Later, when events permitted, he would indulge himself in his fury, but the plan came first. The plan always came first. Once he was certain of his control, Sidious walked over to the comm station and tapped in a frequency. The station was substantially larger than most, and it drew enough power to generate an audible hum. The whole apparatus fairly bristled with components and technology found only on the various identical stations Sidious had set up in his many bases and hideaways. It took most of a minute just for the station to finish its encryption protocols, and another 3 for it to set up the unique mixture of frequency hopping, signal bouncing, and piggybacking that ensured no one in the galaxy could even detect his transmission, let alone eavesdrop on it. The system was the result of centuries of careful improvements by generations of Sith and marked one of Sidious's most potent advantages over the Jedi. He could communicate freely from the very heart of the Republic, all the while intercepting most of the Order's supposedly secret transmissions. It was one of those intercepted transmissions that had prompted him down here in the first place. When the comm station beeped to signal it had finished securing the transmission, it didn't take long before the holodeble flickered into life, projecting the figure of a tall, sharp-featured man with white hair and beard, and piercing yellow eyes. After the barest moment's hesitation, the figure dropped to one knee and bowed. "What is thy bidding, my master?" "There has been a new development, Lord Tyrannus," Sidious said. Aura Singh failed to dispose of Uzumaki. She fled, and the Jedi have dispatched 2 of their own to hunt her down, Jiraiya and Master Unduli. They must not succeed. However, this presents us with an opportunity. Singh will no doubt flee to Hutt space. You think the Jedi will follow her there? Sidious allowed a thin smile to cross his face. A temporary tool he may have been, but Tyrannus was still an excellent apprentice, cunning, ruthless, and dangerous. If he were but a few decades younger, Sidious would never have dared risk giving the man true power. Even now, he would have to keep a close watch on him to avoid meeting the same fate he himself had visited upon Plagueis. "I have foreseen it," he said. Dooku frowned in contemplation. If the Jedi are caught interfering outside of Republic space, it would cause quite the scandal. Perhaps even enough to push the Hutts over to the Separatists. Indeed, Sidious said, though privately he sneered a little. Tyrannus may have been a cunning and capable strategist, but he thought too small. The Hutt's reaction was nothing compared to the new power the Chancellor would gain over the Jedi when the Senate learned of their actions. You will send an agent to Nar Shaddaa to ensure the Jedi are discovered. Retrieve Singh and ensure the Jedi believe the Confederacy is behind it. We will use their own suspicions against them. Do you wish to use Fett, Master? Sidious toyed with the idea for a moment. It had merit. Fett, despite being force-blind, was likely the most capable and reliable asset he had after Tyrannus himself. The man would complete the mission perfectly, of that he had no doubt. However, the risks of exposing Fett too early outweighed the benefits of his near-chilling competence. In the end, he shook his head. No. Fett will remain where he is until after the war begins. Your new assassin, though, she is ready? A Sith assassin, even a fresh one, would do far more to rattle the Jedi than any Mandalorian, even one such as Fett. Seeing her acting in concert with forces loyal to the Separatists would wipe out any hope for diplomacy going forward. Yes, my lord. I have trained her well. Had you used her instead of Singh, the Uzumaki boy would even now be GHHHRRK. With a twitch of one hand, Sidious reached across the galaxy with the Force and choked off his apprentice's words in their tracks. Do not think to question me, apprentice. Advice, I welcome. Insolence, I do not. Is that understood? From over 7,000 light-years away, he dragged Tyrannus off the floor until his legs dangled in the air beneath him. The man couldn't respond to his question, of course. It had been years, but Sidious still remembered well the sensation from when his master used to punish him like this for some failure or slight. The cold, invisible fingers freezing his breath in his throat. That awful feeling of being dragged upwards by red-hot hooks, hanging helpless in the air. The black fear that this time, Plagueis wouldn't relent until his heart stopped, that this time would be the time. He spent several delicious seconds relishing in sensing those same feelings in his own apprentice. Finally, just as he felt Tyrannus's consciousness begin to fade, he released his hold. The older man instantly collapsed to the ground, coughing and gasping for precious oxygen. Yes, my master. My apologies. Remember your place, my apprentice, or I will not be so gentle in reminding you next time. Tyrannus bowed his head once more, still massaging his throat. Sidious gave him a few additional instructions on the specifics of his plan before he cut off the transmission. He was satisfied that he had suitably quailed any burgeoning ambitions his apprentice may have been harboring, at least for the moment, and he had work to do. Ironically, it took even more effort to run the Republic into the ground than it would have to simply let it keep limping on. The whole crumbling edifice reminded him of an ancient Exegorth he had once seen on the verge of death. Most of the beast was already dead, and what little remained was dying, but the whole moribund creature was so enormous that even its death throes came sluggishly. Even after its heart had stilled and decayed, the beast had taken almost 2 years to pass. Still, for all its age and size and strength, for its redundant organs and near-mystical endurance, it had, inevitably, died. As he watched the hooded figure of his master vanish from above the Holodable, Count Dooku of Sereno, Darth Tyrannus of the Sith Order, and head of state of the Confederacy of Independent Systems trembled in fear. Fear and rage. It had been foolish of him to give voice to his snide comments, foolish indeed. Had any other being in the galaxy dared to humiliate him in his own palace like that, their death would have become the stuff of whispered legend. Sidious, however, had just demonstrated why he was the one being whom Dooku still feared. His strength in the Force, even from halfway across the galaxy, had instantly trumped Dooku's own, and easily at that. So, rather than indulge himself in pointless fantasies of revenge, Dooku took a moment and mastered himself. Rage, for him, was a cold, precise tool, a dagger carved from ice. Useful, but best kept in reserve, for the proper moment. He stored his rage, harboring it for when he could turn it into productive action. Wasting such exquisite fury would be inelegant, and Dooku prided himself on his elegance. When he had regained his calm and his breath, Dooku pressed a single button on his desk. Nothing apparently happened, but barely a minute later, the door hissed open and a woman walked into the room. She wore a long combat skirt and a form-fitting top that left much of her generous chest exposed. Her skin was a pale gray, and dark purple tattoos marked her bald head and sneering face. Many would have, perhaps, found her beautiful, in a cold and dangerous sort of way, but few would ever have had the courage to even look. She walked with a predator's grace, her movements speaking to well-earned confidence and deadly skill. When she was directly in front of his desk, she dropped to one knee and bowed her head, unknowingly adopting the same position Dooku himself had so recently occupied. "What is your bidding, my master?" she asked. Her voice was low and raspy, with a subtle undercurrent of glee. Most people would have missed it, but Dooku was not most people. Nevertheless, he allowed her the minor slip. She had been waiting for this day for years, after all. "Rise, Ventress. I have a mission for you." Ventress stood, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "You will take a team of Gossam commandos and go to Nar Shaddaa. Once there, locate Aurra Sing and wait for 2 Jedi to arrest her. It should be Luminara Unduli and Jiraiya. Let them take her, but do not let them keep her, understand? Take Sing, allow yourself to be seen, but do not engage with the Jedi. Dooku knew what her response would be, and sure enough, her lips curled in disgust. Run? Why not just kill them, Master? The Jedi will be no match for me. I could take them out and retrieve Sing before anyone dash. Dooku raised one finger and let her feel a hint of his power, along with his displeasure. He did not punish her, yet, as it would be foolish to damage an asset immediately before a mission, but her voice still cut off, and a look of fear stole over her haughty face. That was good. She knew to fear him, at least. Don't let your arrogance blind you, Asajj. Luminara alone is beyond your current skills, and Jiraiya is in another league entirely. They would kill you easily in a direct fight. He could feel the anger and shame pouring off of her, but he could not have cared less. Ventress was a skilled enough warrior, but she was no use to him if she got herself killed out of stupid pride or uncontrolled rage. Fortunately for her, she kept herself in check, though he could feel her hatred growing with every word he spoke. Your skills aside, it is vital that you are seen, he continued. This is not a stealth mission. Do you understand? Yes, Master. Ventress spat the words as if they burned her tongue, but she said them, and that was what mattered. He did not care if she was furious. She would not dare disobey him. He had shown her exactly where that path led early on in her training. Good. I have a contact on Nar Shaddaa, a bounty hunter. Meet with him, and he will arrange for the Jedi to be otherwise occupied while you make your escape. Do not fail me, Ventress. This is your most important task yet. She recognized the dismissal in his voice and bowed once more. It will be done, my lord. The flight from Anshan to Rago was mercifully brief, being just over an hour. The last thing either Jiraiya or Luminara wanted at the moment was to spend time flying when they could be busy tracking down Aura so they could get back to Naruto and Barris. They chatted amiably during the journey, but the moment their shuttle reverted to real space, a grim silence fell over both of them. Even from low orbit, Luminara could sense the disturbance in the force that came from the planet below. It was not a true wound in the force as might have been created if millions had died rather than a few dozen, but such violent death, especially of a Jedi such as Vair, still left a lasting mark. It would likely be years, maybe decades, before the last echoes faded completely. As they descended through the atmosphere, she felt more. There were traces of chakra scattered around the land, but it didn't feel like any chakra she had sensed before. It was denser, more potent, and suffused with malice. Even the dregs that were left radiated more power than some Padawans. It's the Cubi's chakra. Luminara almost jumped when Jiraiya spoke. She had been so absorbed in what she was sensing she had tuned out completely. What you're sensing, it's the Cubi's chakra, Jiraiya repeated. His voice and face were both unusually somber. After the attack on Konoha, the day Naruto was born, it felt like this. It felt just like this. She didn't know what to say to that. He was clearly lost in some memory. From what she knew of the night he was speaking of and what had come after, she doubted it was a happy one. It galled her that she couldn't offer some comfort to her friend and partner, but her limited experience with her own emotions failed her here. In the end she merely reached out and squeezed his hand, a gesture he returned, before she focused once more on piloting their shuttle towards the wreck of the Crucible. It was only just dawn where they were headed, and the morning fog still lay thick and opaque across the forest. She had to rely on the scanners to locate the crashed training vessel and land next to it. Mindful of the secrets still stored aboard the ancient ship, and not wanting the attack to stir a media frenzy, the Council had politely but firmly refused Chancellor Palpatine's offer to send a Republic investigation team to look into the tragedy. As such, only a dozen or so temple guards, along with a complement of forensic droids, were present to secure and maintain the scene. One of them, not a human, she thought, judging by his towering height and build, strode over to greet them as they exited the shuttle. Master Luminara, Jiraiya-sensei, he said, marking himself out as one of the Jedi who had received Jiraiya's chakra instruction over the past few years. The deep resonance of his voice, along with the distinctive hum sound of a blowhole, marked him out as a Herdlick. Please follow me. We've kept everything preserved as best we can. As the heavily built guard led them to the site of Naruto's initial battle with the Mandalorians, Jiraiya asked him a series of questions. What sort of weapons had shot down the crucible? Were there any matches on genetic samples from the Mandalorian bodies? Were any of them wearing any known clan symbols or iconography? Had they possessed any traceable weapons or other gear? He speaks like an experienced Jedi investigator, Luminara noted, mildly impressed. He must have spent some time brushing up on modern forensics in the past few years. The guard's answers were, predictably, not very encouraging. All the weapons used had been high quality, but also widely obtainable in the mid and outer rim. None of the recovered corpses had been identifiable, nor had they worn clan markings. It sounded as if the Mandalorians were a dead end, much as Jiraiya had predicted. Even so, it was still worth taking a look around the scene, just in case. The site of the initial battle proved a grisly scene. Whatever measures the forensic droids had taken to ensure the evidence did not degrade had certainly been successful. 6 bodies lay strewn about the scorched trees, surrounded by blood. One, a woman's, had been decapitated. A trail of blood led to where her head had rolled a few meters from her body, still in the distinct helmet. Another had been stabbed in the armpit with a lightsaber. The other 4 were covered in nearly invisible cuts, as if someone had slashed them wildly with an incredibly fine razor. This is from one of Naruto's futon ninjutsu, Jiraiya said, gesturing at the 4 who had been sliced to ribbons. It's like the guard said. No clan markings, no unique symbols at all. Not even honor marks. That must be deliberate, Luminara said. Whoever hired them didn't want any chance of being discovered, even if there were survivors. Jiraiya nodded. We should send the bodies and armor to Mandalore. They might be able to see something we're missing. Meanwhile, I want to try and break down their tactics. For reference, later. You think they've attacked publicly before? Luminara supposed it was possible, but she doubted it. A group of Mandalorians this large would have trouble staying secret for long if they operated openly. Maybe, Jiraiya tilted his hand side to side. Or maybe they'll attack again in the future. We also shouldn't discount the idea that Aura might be with whatever's left of this group. That could be dozens of commandos for all we know. If it comes to a fight, I want every advantage I can get. Luminara grimaced internally at the thought of fighting an entire platoon of Mandalorians and agreed. It proved to be grim work, made even worse by the oppressive atmosphere that permeated the area. Over the next half hour, through careful analysis of the various blast marks and insights from the Force, they pieced together a decent idea of how the Mandalorians had fought. Though neither of them had Quinlan's gift for psychometry, there was still ample evidence to work with. The picture grew even more complete when they looked at where Aura and the Mandalorians had first captured the younglings. What they put together was disturbing. They were trained to fight Force users, Luminara said. Jedi in particular. The blast patterns, the flechettes. Those bodies back there had repulsor weapons in their vambraces. They wouldn't buy such specialized gear just for one mission against children they outnumbered. No, they wouldn't. Jiraiya looked thoughtful. They obviously trained with the idea of fighting Jedi, but I don't think they had a lot of experience actually facing Force users. They had the right idea, but from what Naruto said, it sounds like they made a lot of small mistakes. Ones you only make when you're well trained, but inexperienced. A cult, maybe? Some splinter group still holding on to the old grudges? Maybe. Jiraiya frowned. Whatever they are, it doesn't matter if we can't find them. Let's take a look at the last site. There's something there I want to try and find. The rising sun had burned away the thick fog by the time they reached their destination, allowing them to see the destruction that had been obscured when they had landed. Force, Luminara whispered when she saw the battlefield. There could be no other word for it. Blaster marks and craters dotted the ground. The remains of more than a dozen bodies painted a gory mosaic atop the charred and pocked terrain. Most were barely identifiable as human. Compared to this, the carnage back near the wreck seemed almost quaint. Everywhere she looked, she saw mangled limbs and scattered viscera, along with impossibly damaged pieces of Mandalorian armor. Worse than any of the gore, worse even than the heavy taint of the Kyuubi's chakra, was the feel from the small patch of ground where Vyre had died. There was nothing visible to distinguish it from the rest of the blood-speckled dirt in the field, but the Force told a different story. A Jedi's powers meant they often left an unseen impact on the world when they died, and Vaer had been no exception. Even without Quinlan's gift of psychometry or Naruto's empathy, she could feel the wellspring of pain and grief pouring from that unassuming patch of ground, as if the Force itself was mourning. She swallowed a sudden lump in her throat, and it took an effort to wrench her focus away. Beyond the field of butchery lay the trench from Naruto's last attack. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The closest comparison she could make was a turbo laser strike, but even that paled in comparison. This looked more like a natural disaster than any conventional weapon. Ever since she had been told about it, she'd known, intellectually, that the Kyuubi was more powerful than any being she had ever met, but it was very different seeing the evidence firsthand. And this was just a fraction of the Fox's power, Jiraiya said, his voice once again somber. Fully unleashed, its attacks can destroy whole mountain ranges. Luminara tried to picture a single being with such power, but her mind just refused to wrap itself around the concept. It was too far outside anything she had seen before today. I knew Naruto was strong-willed, but for him to resist something so powerful, I think I've been underestimating him. I doubt many Jedi, even Masters, would fare so well. Well, it's easy to underestimate him when he keeps acting like such a twerp, Jiraiya said. When Luminara looked at him, he was smiling for the first time since they had left hyperspace. Though his tone gave away nothing but gentle teasing, she felt as though she had just passed some sort of test. I suppose it's only natural for him to want to gauge my reaction to knowing about the Kyuubi, she thought, though she was still a little insulted that he had felt the need. The sting faded quickly, though. Naruto would always be his first priority, and that was the way it ought to be. Attachment issues aside, not that such things bothered her too much anymore, Jiraiya was the only adult in Naruto's life who truly knew and understood all of his secrets. She doubted even Mace was as close to the boy, and it actually sent another of those warm pulses of not quite friendship through her chest to see him so protective of his charge. Aha! Found it! For the second time in as many hours, Jiraiya's voice startled her out of her thoughts. When she turned to see what he had found, she saw, rather disturbingly, that he was crouched over a severed arm with a triumphant grin on his face. From the bone-white skin and long, skeletal fingers, she hazarded a guess that it was Aura Singh's arm, and said as much. That's right, Jiraiya said, still grinning. He had the look of a man who had just won a prize. More importantly, it's got her scent. Luminara frowned for a moment before comprehension dawned. You want to use a tracking toad to find her? Jiraiya nodded and pulled out a scroll to seal the arm away. Will that even work? She asked. Surely we would have to at least be on the same planet for them to catch her scent. Oh, at least, Jiraiya agreed as he tucked the now sealed arm into his robes. But I've got plenty of contacts in the underworld. I'm betting at least one of them will know where she is. In fact, I think I know just who to ask first. Luminara raised a skeptical eyebrow. Leaving aside how, exactly, you came by these nefarious contacts of yours, what makes you think they'll give up Aura Singh for you, or that you could even trust what they say if they do? She has a reputation for creative and sadistic vengeance. Criminals are unlikely to inform on her. Hey, don't discount the power of my magnetic personality and irresistible charm, he replied, waggling his eyebrows in a manner he no doubt thought was amusing. Luminara tried to convey in her gaze exactly how much it failed to amuse her, while simultaneously suppressing the smirk that tried to pull at her lips. She was not going to encourage him, she told herself. Not even a little. His self-satisfied grin told her exactly how successful she had been at concealing her amusement, but he chose not to call her out on it, which she appreciated. Seriously, though, my contacts are solid. Some of them owe me. Others are scared of me. A few I help out from time to time. Stars, some of them are even genuinely decent people who happen to hear things. Trust me, I've been doing stuff like this for decades now. I know how to get good intel out of a source. Force knows why, but I do trust you, Jiraiya, she sighed, and it was true. To her shock, she realized she probably trusted him more than anyone else in the galaxy. Somehow, in the almost 3 years since she had met him, Jiraiya had gone from being a bizarre acquaintance, whom she neither fully trusted nor approved of, to her closest friend and someone she would trust with her life without hesitation. For just a moment, Jiraiya gave her one of his rare, sincere smiles, one totally bereft of any teasing or obfuscation. She treasured seeing those smiles and found herself returning it gladly. It didn't last more than a handful of heartbeats, but the warm feeling returned, and left her feeling light and buoyed, despite her oppressive surroundings. The force glowed for a moment, and then it was gone. I should call my contact, Jiraiya said, smoothly sliding back behind his mask of insouciance. Despite that, Luminara could still see the smile in his eyes. She said nothing, though, and merely nodded her agreement. Whatever that moment had or had not been, she wasn't willing to sully it with questions just yet. They would come later, but for now, she allowed herself to just be. Jiraiya pulled out his comlink along with an additional piece of hardware. As he hooked the two together, she recognized what the second device was. It was a high-end signal scrambler and encryption module. Such things were not precisely illegal, but neither were they the sort of thing honest, reputable beings typically had access to. She was, somehow, not at all surprised to see Jiraiya owned one. No sane person would ever accuse him of being reputable, after all. He probably would have been horrified if they had. After a few seconds of fiddling, he entered a long contact code and settled in to wait for a response. They didn't have to wait long. After just a few moments, a hollow emitter on the comlink blinked into life, and projected the image of a short, portly, female Trandoshan. The woman's reptilian eyes narrowed when she took in Jiraiya's face. "Oh, it's you. I thought I told you never talk homie again. Did you, Sid?" Jiraiya scratched his head, as if confused about something. "Strange, I can't recall you saying anything of the sort." The Trandoshan woman, Sid, apparently, snorted and rolled her eyes, but didn't press the matter. Instead, she zeroed in on Luminara and jabbed one clawed finger in her direction. "Who's the new face?" "You know how I feel about new people." Luminara stepped forward to introduce herself. "I'm Jedi Master Luminara Unduli. I assure you, we bear you no ill intent." "Aha! That's nice, sweetheart." Luminara blinked as Sid dismissed her entirely and turned to Jiraiya, one brow ridge arched expectantly. "Calm down, Sid. She's solid. You have my word on that. We just need some information." Sid glared at both of them for a few more seconds before she sighed and shook her head. "Fine. I just know I'm gonna regret this, but fine. What do you want to know?" "We're looking for Aura Singh," Jiraiya said, as calmly as if he were remarking on the weather. Sid's eyes shot wide open at that. "I figured if anyone knows what hole she's crawled into, it's you." "Yeesh, you don't ask for much, huh? You want anything else while we're at it, like a hypercom relay or the Supreme Chancellor's underwear?" "I'm pretty sure I've got the coordinates for the Katana fleet around here somewhere." Sid Jiraiya started, but the irritable Trandoshan cut him off. "No, don't you Sid me. Have you got any idea how valuable information like that is? What people would do to me if they found out I gave it to a Jedi?" "Ha!" Sid swiped a clawed hand across her throat. "I ain't about to put my neck on the line like that, you hear me?" Luminara hurried to speak before she could cut off the transmission. "Please, madam, we would not ask for something like this lightly. It is imperative we find Aura-san as soon as possible." Sid rolled her eyes. "Oh yeah? What's so important this time, huh? The way I hear, Aura's been making a problem for you lot for decades, now. So why the sudden rush? She pisses in some high-and-mighty's tea, or something?" Luminara frowned. "I'm afraid I cannot share the dash. She attacked a Jedi training vessel and murdered a youngling." Jiraiya spoke over her, and all the humor was gone from his voice. In its place was a core of pitiless durasteel. Sid went very, very still when she heard Jiraiya's words. Her nostrils flared and the spines atop her cranial crest twitched a little bit, but that was all. Eventually, she took a hissing breath and her upper lip curled back for a moment, revealing a glimpse of sharp, serrated fangs. "Well, Kriff, Kark, and Stang." The Trandoshan sighed again. "Last I heard, Aura was on an Arshada. Chatter was she was hurt. Real hurt. Came limping off some Mando ship near the northern spice market with one arm missing, muttering shit about monsters. That's all I heard, though, and I ain't asking around about it." "Not on your life." "Thank you, Sid," Jiraiya said. "That helps. You can thank me by making sure none of this comes back in my head." You got that? And don't call me again, either. You always get me into shit like this. Jiraiya clapped his hands to his heart and mimed a surprised gasp. Don't be ridiculous, Sid. You know you enjoy our talks. They add a touch of spice to your life. Besides, if I stopped calling, how would you find someone as charming and handsome as myself to talk to? Sid stared at him as if he'd suggested she perform a specific sex act with a small bird. I swear, I'm gonna shoot you in the liver one of these days. Before Jiraiya could respond, she cut off the transmission. He sighed and shook his head. You meet such nice people in this line of work. It took most of Luminara's prodigious self-control not to stare at him with her jaw hanging open. Was that a typical conversation with one of your contacts? What do you mean? She told you never to call her again. Not for the first time, either, from what I gathered. Oh, that. Jiraiya shrugged. She wasn't serious. She threatened to shoot you. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again and looked thoughtful. Okay, that part she might have been serious about. Luminara rubbed the bridge of her nose to try to stave off a headache. Suddenly, she sympathized with Sid and her urge to ventilate Jiraiya. Hey, don't worry about it, Jiraiya said. We got the information we needed. I'll smooth things over with Sid later. She thought about pressing the issue, but decided that way only madness lay. She'd seen firsthand before how Jiraiya's methods, as bizarre and ridiculous as they often appeared, yielded results. Questioning him and his apparent lunacy only led to him giving maddeningly vague answers that usually left the questioner faintly worried for their life. She did not have the energy to endure that at the moment, especially when it wouldn't get her anywhere. Besides, if she does shoot him, he may actually learn a valuable lesson, she reasoned. It wasn't the most worthy of thoughts for a Jedi Master to have, but Jiraiya had a way of driving even the calmest beings into a frothing rage with hardly any effort at all. By those standards, Luminara considered she was doing very well. If you say so, she said. We need to get to Nar Shaddaa. Before we do that, we're going to need permission from the council. And a different ship. Naruto thoroughly enjoyed his first few hours on Master Fei's ship. The Dawn Wind was unlike any spacecraft he'd been in before, an intoxicating blend of practicality and beauty. He spent the first 2 hours of their flight just examining the custom-built yacht, noting all the interesting design and engineering choices, and memorizing the best of them to try out the next time he and Anakin set to modifying a ship. While she still refused to let him fly, Master Fei was at least willing to answer his many questions about her long-time transport. All too soon, though, Mace brought him down from his excitement and told him to meditate on what had happened and on what was to come. Naruto sighed, but agreed without an argument. He knew his master only had his best interests in mind, could literally feel it through their bond, but it still didn't make meditating on his failures on Rago any more appealing. He didn't like dwelling on the past at the best of times, but now, when it was necessary, it hurt the worst. Nevertheless, he settled down in the small training area next to the living quarters and tried to quiet his mind. He ran through all the different breathing exercises Mace had taught him and reached out to the Force to soothe him and give him guidance as he thought about Rago. Ideally, it would let him consider the events calmly and gain new insight he may have missed otherwise. Predictably, though, it wasn't so easy. Anger lanced through him like a raging fire as he remembered the attack. First, at the Mandalorians. True, he had killed most of them, both as himself and when the QB had possessed him. However, the scum who'd murdered Vyre had escaped, along with his lieutenant. The injustice of that galled him, all the more because he could do nothing about it. He couldn't even promise to bring the man to justice, not when he had no way of finding him. Next was his anger at Aura Singh. She had organized the attack. She had hired the man who killed his sister. She had hurt his friends and tried to kill them. Worst of all, she had enjoyed it. He had heard the sadistic glee in her voice and seen the panting bloodlust in her eyes. Aura was a monster, plain and simple. Crazy or not, the very thought of her made him grind his teeth. All of that he could have accepted and moved past, though. He reserved the greatest part of his rage, by far, for the QB. The others may have tried to hurt his friends, and that was unforgivable, but the fox had done something even worse. He had tried to make Naruto hurt his friends. When he remembered the mocking laughter, the pain of his skin burning and his blood boiling, and the terrible, malicious will of the Kyuubi, anger pooled hot in his gut. Red eyes glowed in the darkness behind his eyelids, and he couldn't tell if the growling he heard in his mind was a memory or the present. His eyes snapped open with a wild cry, and he toppled backwards and landed in a heap. "Damn it," he cursed. Cold sweat had beaded on his brow and soaked through his tunic. When he looked at his chrono, he saw to his surprise that 4 hours had passed. 4 hours, he thought with a shake of his head. 4 hours and I couldn't even relax once. Things continued in much the same vein for the next day. No matter how much he tried, Naruto just couldn't think about the Kyuubi without wanting to punch a hole in something. Mace tried giving him advice, and even meditating with him, but it didn't help much. "I don't understand why I can't do this," Naruto growled. "It's just some stupid meditation." "Calm yourself, Naruto," Mace said, no more bothered by his Padawan's anger than a mountain was by a breeze. "Take a deep breath. Do not multiply your troubles by lashing out. Identify the problem and go from there." Naruto nodded and took a calming breath. It helped, so he took another, and then another. By the 5th one, he had calmed down enough to think clearly. "I'm angry at the Kyuubi." "You have meditated while angry before," Mace pointed out. "What is different now?" His steady presence and calm tone stood in sharp relief to Naruto's antsy, turbulent mind. Naruto latched onto that and tried to borrow some of that calm for himself. Eventually, after a few minutes of mulling it over, he thought he had his answer. "I can't focus through it this time. I can't order my thoughts. It's like when I was a kid, everything's jumbled and I can't sit still." Mace nodded. "That is to be expected. You are off balance, and sitting still has never been your strength. Fighting that right now will only make things worse. I suggest you go back to what helped you then. If you cannot sit still and meditate, then move and meditate." It took Naruto a moment to work out what Mace was suggesting, but when he got it, he gave his master a huge eye smile. "A spar?" Mace grinned himself, a flash of white teeth that vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. "If you feel up to it." Naruto scrambled to his feet, already excited to test himself against Mace. He had yet to edge out a genuine win against his master, but he got a tiny bit closer every time they crossed blades. Before they could start clearing an area for a spar, though, a voice from the doorway interrupted them and made Naruto jump. "Actually, I was wondering if you wouldn't like to spar with me," Master Fei said, having, once again, somehow snuck up on him despite his advanced senses and empathic powers. Naruto's jaw dropped when he registered what she had said, and even Mace looked caught off guard. The faintest hint of amusement colored her presence, but Naruto was too busy being stunned to take note. "Why you?" I thought you didn't have a lightsaber," he stammered. She smiled her somewhat disquieting smile and tilted her head. "Is that what they're saying about me?" "Well, it is true, I don't carry a lightsaber with me most of the time, and I do my best to avoid fighting at all, but I do still have my blade. I believe most Jedi are far too quick to resort to their lightsaber rather than resolve conflicts peacefully. That doesn't mean I will wholly part with my lightsaber. Remember, they are an extension of our being, not merely a weapon. So, what do you say?" Yes," he exclaimed, before calming himself. "I would be honored to spar with you, Master Fei." Her small smile widened when he agreed, and she held out one hand, fingers splayed. There was a dull thump from somewhere deeper in the ship, and a few seconds later, a silver lightsaber hilt flew through the open door and straight into her waiting grasp. "I'm glad to hear it. Master Windu, if you would care to referee?" "Of course." He stood up, and together they moved to the training room. With a wave of her hand, Faye cleared the meditation mats off the floor and neatly stacked them in a corner. She and Naruto both shed their outer robes, leaving them clad in their tunics and tabards. Naruto took a moment to dial his lightsaber's power down to training mode, and he presumed Faye did the same when she adjusted a control on the base. Once they were ready, and Mace had taken up a position off to the side, they bowed and activated their blades. Naruto's blade bathed the room in brilliant orange light. He felt the subtle warmth of the carvings beneath his hands as they lit up with the same glow. The copper of his hilt reflected the light of his blade, giving the appearance that he was wielding a shaft of pure light from an evening sun. Faye's blade, on the other hand, was a deep emerald color. The hilt was simple, with a long, slender design and a disc-shaped guard below the emitter. Even with her saber ignited, the legendary master didn't look particularly threatening. Indeed, with her youthful appearance and short, slender build, she looked almost frail. Despite that, she held herself with an easy confidence that made Naruto wary. All his instincts told him the opponent across from him was a serious threat, no matter what she looked like. They faced each other, unmoving, for several seconds, before Naruto broke the tension. He had never believed in letting an opponent make the first move, and he didn't do so now. With force-enhanced speed, he rushed forward, feinted high, and then spun and went for a low strike at Faye's legs. It was a favorite combo of his, designed to disorient an opponent and give them no time to defend themselves. In theory, even if she managed to defend against the true attack, it would still leave her open for a follow-up. In reality, none of that happened. Rather than block his strike, Faye jumped straight over his head, landed behind him, and kicked him square in the back. Her size belied her strength, and the blow knocked Naruto clean off his feet. At the last second, he turned his fall into a roll and avoided a follow-up reverse stab that would have caught him in the heart. "Not bad, Padawan," Faye said as she turned to face him again. "You have good reactions. Don't overcommit on your first attack, though." Naruto grinned beneath his mask. Some Jedi may have derided his enthusiasm, but he loved sparring, especially against someone new. There was always so much to learn, both about his opponent and himself. In a way, he felt he understood why Sasuke had always been eager to test himself against new opponents. It was exhilarating. With an enthusiastic shout, he dove back into the fray. Orange saber met green, and the crackle of the blades filled the room. Overall, Faye proved to be an interesting sparring partner. She fought with a blended style, like most of the older masters, switching between Sorisu and Makashi. Her swordsmanship was excellent, but a little stiff, as he would have expected from someone who hadn't wielded a lightsaber in earnest for decades, perhaps even centuries. Nonetheless, she clearly had kept up with her training, and her superlative force abilities more than covered any gaps in her blade work. Naruto threw himself into Juyo as he pressed the attack, taking full advantage of the form's constant aggression and unpredictable nature. He feinted, switched angles, and even varied his speed and rhythm in order to gain an advantage. Faye steadily gave ground under Naruto's relentless attacks, but her defense proved solid. Each time his orange blade flicked out to strike at her, her own intercepted it. Just before she ran out of room to retreat, though, she shifted tactics. Naruto aimed a slash at her neck, expecting a block, only for her to parry his blade to one side and stab directly at his face. The force blared its warning, and he bent backwards nearly 90 degrees to avoid a painful welt on his nose. "Your Juyo is excellent, Padawan," Faye said, as she danced away from his return stab and slashed at his knees. "Master Winda told me you've progressed more rapidly than any Padawan he's ever seen." Naruto fell back on his Sorisa training to block the blow to his legs, along with the next two stabs at his abdomen. "I train a lot. I need to be strong if I'm going to keep my promises." Now it was Faye's turn to advance. She let loose with a series of quick jabbing attacks. What they lacked in overwhelming power they made up for in frightening speed and precision. Naruto had to backpedal rapidly to maintain his defense. "He also tells me you've helped him develop Vapad from a mere Form 7 variant into a separate form in its own right. I just practiced against him while he was teaching me," Naruto said, though he couldn't stop the warm bubble of pride at hearing his master's praise, even secondhand. "It's not that big a deal." After a few more seconds, Naruto felt he had a grasp on Faye's rhythm and took a chance. Rather than just blocking her short slice at his elbow, he dodged towards her, jamming her attack. Before she could recover, he brought his lightsaber around in a rising sweep. In an actual fight, it would have sliced her in two, or it would have, if Faye hadn't dropped her own lightsaber, grabbed his arm before he could hit her, and pulled him into a shoulder throw. For Naruto, the world suddenly spun on its axis before the ground rushed up to smack the breath out of his lungs. It was a stunning display of close-in fighting skill and, for most Jedi, that would have been the end of the match. Naruto, however, was an even better hand fighter than he was a swordsman, and that was saying something. In the instant before he hit the ground, he twisted his wrist to grab onto her forearm. When he landed, he used his body weight to yank down on Faye, while simultaneously using his legs to push her upwards. The end result was that Faye went sailing through the air towards the opposite end of the room, giving him just enough time to scramble to his feet. She landed on her feet, though, and her lightsaber shot across the room and back into her grasp. Naruto's smile had turned into a full-on grin. This was the most fun he'd had in over a week. Everything felt simpler when he was in a fight, especially when nothing was really at stake, like now. There were no philosophical puzzles, no past, no future. It was just action and reaction, problem and solution, a primal dance he'd been training for almost since he could walk. They traded another few blows, even faster than before. This time, neither of them could gain a decisive advantage over the other. Naruto was so engrossed in attack and defense, parry and counter riposte that Faye's voice came as a shock. You say he taught you Vapad, but you haven't used it in our spar. Why is that? Naruto frowned as he tried to formulate his answer while also keeping his focus on their spar. Vapad is not for me. I can use it, but it doesn't feel right. How so? Faye spun away from a stab and kicked at his stomach. Vapad is all about taking your enemy's hatred and aggression, harnessing it, and sending it back at them, Naruto said. He shrugged off the kick and pushed her back with a flurry of blows. I don't feel right doing that. Jiraiya-sensei taught me to break the cycle of hatred, starting with myself. Vapad feels like I'm perpetuating it. As he spoke, he couldn't help but cast a guilty look at his master. Disparaging Vapad, even like that, felt like an attack against Mace. The older man met his eyes and gave him a barely perceptible shrug and spoke down the training bond. Do not apologize for what you believe, Naruto. You proved you could control Vapad, but that does not mean I will demand that you embrace it. You are not weaker than I for not using it, merely different. Naruto sent a wave of gratitude to his master for his understanding before he had to backflip away from a blow that would have caught him in the lungs otherwise. Don't lose focus, Padawan, Faye said, her eyes glittering with the same wild joy he felt. Her voice and forced presence betrayed nothing of her inner feelings, though. You had more to say. It wasn't a question. Somehow, she had seen right through him. Naruto winced at being called out like this, but there was nothing for it, now. It wasn't like he could have kept this a secret for much longer. I've actually been working on my own lightsaber form, he said. Mace twitched and Faye's eyes widened. He could feel their shock through the force. Faye actually disengaged, giving them more space to talk. You have been inventing an entirely new saber form? Naruto, you do know you have a long way to go before you even master Juyo, let alone the other forms? Mace asked with his typical bluntness. Their bond rang with surprise and a touch of confusion. When Naruto glanced over at his master, he saw his eyebrow raised in an expression eerily reminiscent of Obi-Wan. Was that something they taught you when you got a Padawan? I know that, master, he said, a touch of irritation creeping into his voice. It wasn't as though he was stupid. I'm not saying it's ready or anything like that. It's just something I've been tinkering with in my spare time. I wanted to find some balance point between Juyo and Sarisu, but without relying on strength like Gemso. The eyebrow rose further. You are attempting to reconcile the two most disparate lightsaber forms into a completely new style of fighting in your spare time? Naruto blinked and realized how ridiculous that probably sounded. Maybe? Mace just shook his head a little as the tiniest of smiles flickered across his face. That's an admirable goal, Faye said. I look forward to seeing what becomes of it one day. For now, though, I have one more question for you. You said you don't want to perpetuate the cycle of hatred. That the first place you had to break it was within yourself. That's right. Well then, my question is this. Do you hate the Kyuubi, Naruto? That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.